Welcome to the stream tonight. Charlie, about 15 minutes ago, or maybe 20 minutes ago, got a call from his son that he had to go help him real quick. So here I am, and here Troy is. So Troy Hall, I know you're Hall apiaries, and you're in New Hampshire, correct?
Correct.
So Troy has agreed to join us this evening, and he has a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm not going to do too much talking at this point. I'm going to let you explain who you are and how you got into bees. And
I'm back.
He's back. Time.
Yeah.
I was going to do the whole, hey, everyone, Sawmill Charlie here. And
now I had to go down and rescue my son. His truck broke down with a load of straw on it, so I yanked him up the road with the tractor. So,
right. Well,
where are we at?
Well, we just started, and I was going to let Troy tell us about himself and then do his presentation.
Yep. I think I don't have anything else to say, but I have talked with Troy on the phone, everyone, and about queens and some interesting topics and stuff. And it's he's got a lot to bring to the crowd tonight and everything. So go ahead, Troy, to tell them, kind of background of your history. And I know that you started out treatment free, which I think that is fabulous. And well, you can expand on that, what happened and everything, all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I thank you for having me on, Charlie. I'm impressed. This is almost like being on the Ed Sullivan show. It's, it's so fun to see how it's doing this type of stuff where, virtual meetings and virtual shows like this. It's fun to see, there's a little intro and you're invited on, you get to, talk to the audience that you have conjured up over the time of doing this. So no, I feel really honored to partake and to have a discussion. And to echo Charlie's comments, talking with him, Charlie here, a little bit on the phone a few days ago. It's really fun to just talk with people that come at beekeeping from different ways, but we're all similar, but we all have something to learn, and we all can kind of broaden our horizons a little bit by just having a nice conversation. So it's really fun to be engaged and have these opportunities to talk to other beekeepers who are just as passionate about, we're all passionate about what we do. So it's just fun to be able to talk about that, our passion and maybe our expertise in some areas to help us maybe shine a light into something that might be foreign to one way that we're not looking at something. But anyways, yeah. So I guess you want me to kind of start with like a basic introduction and then we can
just give a basic background of how you started out. And I know, of course, now you are full-fledged commercial. You have over 300 plus production hives, and it just kind of, I know that's what you're going to kind of do in your presentation, but just kind of a quick synopsis.
Yeah, so I started out like most people in beekeeping, or maybe not most, but my story was at a high school. I started with 2 packages, and this was 2005. I think 2005. I graduated in 2004, so it's like you can tell how young or how Ian. Yeah, I've been doing this. It's funny because time flies, right? It's like I'm almost 40 years old. I feel like I'm still in my 20s, but doing this bee thing now for the last almost 20 years, my back is always reminding me that I don't have the back of a 20-year-old. I have the back of a late, almost 40-year-old man. And anyway, so I started keeping bees, quickly fell in love with this, with everything about it. And I like to tell people, like, in what was going on in beekeeping in 2005. It wasn't that long ago, but for those that have been doing this long enough, obviously varroa mites were like public enemy number one. VSH, varroa-sensitive hygienics, SMR, that was a brand new kind of thing coming on the marketplace. Russian bees were still kind of, the Russian Bee Breeders Association was this infant kind of thing that was getting going. The USDA had released that stock into the beekeeping public, and obviously entrusted that with the Russian bee breeders. But just to kind of show people, what did the industry look like at that point in time. Mite Away Quick Strips had like their first version of their product that they had out. They had these huge pads that really like just literally cooked the bees. The grass in front of the hive was scorched if you used it, and so it was an interesting time. The scene on essentially Amortized didn't have all the stuff that we're seeing today. Beekeeping was, honey prices were, I don't know, nothing's changed there. Everyone, nobody was getting what they should have been getting for honey prices, but it wasn't that long ago. 20 some odd years ago isn't that long in the grand scheme of someone who's been doing this for 40 years or plus, made a career of it. But I was talking to Bob before the show. It seemed like this wave of hobbyists, of interest in the general public, has just kept going. I remember when I started that there was not really much interest in bees. It was just starting to kind of get going, and then all of a sudden something happened. I think actually it was CCD, colony collapse disorder, and the New York Times releasing the article on colony collapse disorder, and it kind of pushed out this information on beekeeping to the general public, and it spurred this huge wave of hobbyists to the art and the craft and the hobby of beekeeping, because everyone wanted to save the bees, or some way or another people found themselves as beekeepers. Bee clubs were inundated with new beekeepers. People were over. Package suppliers were overwhelmed with all these orders coming in every year. They couldn't meet the market demands. Anyways, so I've been doing this just long enough to see a little bit of the industry kind of change for the good, because of the attention that the general public has now towards honeybees and just honey and all things bees. But so started as a hobby. I went from like 2 to 10, 12, I quickly found myself at 50 colonies. And at that point in time, I was starting to raise my own queens. And at the same time, I found guys like Michael Palmer, Kirk Webster, who are all in, I live up in that part of the world where these two gentlemen had established their apiaries. And if you guys aren't familiar with them, I don't probably need to explain Michael Palmer, but both of them are, it's funny, they operate with similar paradigms. And I felt like I didn't need to reinvent the wheel, because what they had going was already working pretty well. Essentially, I adopted the paradigm of kind of growing my hobby into a vocation upon just finding out that I could do it as a hobby. The fact that people were keeping bees for their vocation, and no one told me in high school that I could become a beekeeper, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The path was go to college. There's nothing wrong with that. I didn't go to college. I got out of high school and I started to sell lumber. I was my dad grew up in the lumber business with him. So I started selling lumber and commission sales and stuff like that. I started my vocation with bees by being exposed to guys like Mike and Kirk. And the fact that they kept bees and they didn't migrate, they were non-migratory. That was kind of really impactful to me. It really was this different way of being. I guess the way I heard it said, I'm trying to remember the beekeeper, his name, Greg. He's down in North Carolina in Asheville. He's actually one of Bob Benny's good friends. Greg, oh gosh, I should have checked myself before anyways, I met him formally at the Bee Expo here last in January. And he said, Troy, the way that we keep bees is kind of like the old fashioned way of commercial beekeeping before everything got palletized, or for everybody, before migratory beekeeping became this. Greg Rogers. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Greg. So Greg, great guy, obviously been doing it a lot longer than I have, but he's got the same mindset that in the same way that guys like Michael Palmer and Kirk Webster, all these, it's just an old fashioned way to keep bees commercially, where you're non-migratory, that the area around you is habitable for a non-migratory operation. The markets for honey and all the products coming out of the apiary, you can kind of sell stuff within a couple 100-mile radius, and you don't have to kind of constantly push the markets out. So it's just really an old-fashioned way to do things. So essentially, in a nutshell, I built my apiary up from a hobby, found out that I could do it for a vocation, and I got to work on growing my apiary with a breeding program as like the general kind of backbone to the whole thing. And what do I mean by that? So I started raising queens, and I quickly discovered that there's many ways to do it. Breeding is really where you actually are making the selection, right? You have a population of colonies that you allow for, you know, natural selection or some sort of selection pressure to be presented, and as the beekeeper that's breeding, you therefore have a way to select based upon observation and data that you're collecting to breed. And then you have propagation of queens, where you're really just raising, you know, you buy a breeder queen from somebody, and there's nothing wrong with this at all. I'm not trying to differentiate or make one way sound more inferior or less than the other, but propagating queens is what most people are familiar with, where you can just buy a breeder queen, where somebody else, the breeder, has done the selection for you. You have the breeder queen in your possession, and you just graft daughters and propagate the daughters out into your apiary. That's a great way to get traits affixed into your apiary. And it's a great way for a particular, let's say as a breeder, you need to bring in something to kind of maybe establish something and fix certain traits. But real breeding is done by you taking kind of possession of a population of bees, and then allowing that population through time and through observation and through your management, you know, selecting and you know, making all those decisions and observations. And I'm pretty sure you guys are following my logic there. Mm-hmm. So my point was that at that point in time, early in my apiary, or early in my my history of building up my apiary, I was just really fascinated with breeding bees, and I was really fascinated with the work. I mean, it's an intense amount of work for those that are doing it. I mean, even if you're just grafting queens and, you know, you're mating them, or you're selling virgins, it's just an immense, you're on a schedule and you have to adhere to the schedule. So it's just an added layer of work already if you're, you know, trying to do other things in your apiary, like produce honey or something. But my point is that the heartbeat of my apiary is breeding. And I started to do that early on. And that, I always tell people, the only way I've been able to sustain my operation is through breeding and through raising queens. If I wasn't raising my own queens, I would have been out of business a long time ago. I couldn't operate on the margins that I did for a long time with running no treatment, because that's like Charlie had mentioned. I started my apiary with using no treatments for mites, and I built up the apiary from 50 hives to 300 hives, all without using treatments. Obviously, it took me a lot longer to get to that number by not using treatments. If I was more conventional, or if I was more practical, I don't know, if I was more conventional with dealing with mites, I could have gotten to 300 colonies a lot quicker, you know, and on a business model, it would have been much more profitable. But my point was that I was trying to breed for resistance. And here's the thing, right? When I started to this whole program, 19, 16, whatever, you know, a little while ago, it was said that to breed for resistance in honeybees was like trying to breed for sheep that were resistant to wolves. That was kind of the constant. That was the, what's the word I'm looking for?
Concept.
Yeah, that was the concept, the example that was given to people that were trying to, you know, go forward with breeding for resistance. And here we are today, and it's just interesting to see how the industry has changed and the conversations has changed, because we're the options for dealing with mites are kind of narrow right now, right? Amitraz is showing its weakness. There's big fissures and cracks starting to open up with resistance to Amitraz, and now all of a sudden there's this attention being kind of focused on, well, maybe we can breed for resistance, and there's a lot of people in the industry that have always kind of been there and been doing the work. And here's the thing, right? If you were to buy most VSH queens, if they truly have a high VSH expression or any really hygienic behavior, are coming from an apiary. Those traits are fixed, and I'm assuming this, I could be wrong, but most of those traits are fixed in apiaries where there's minimal or no treatments being used to select for those treatments or for those traits. So a lot of the heavy lifting in the industry has been done by breeders without using treatments, because you have to have natural selection, be able to put pressure on bees to bring out those specific traits. And that was just the way that things were done then. We didn't have UBO. We didn't have the Harbo assay, you know, that all is, and in the last few years have been like these talking points, and that everyone's becoming more familiarized with. The industry was just left with, you know, how do you breed for mite resistance? And nobody really, I mean, the USDA and guys like John Harbaugh and I forget his partner that he was working with there at the USDA, they had systems in place to measure and to begin to understand with certain traits, right? But there's a lot to this. Resistance isn't just BSH. It's not just allo grooming. It's not just, you know, it's hygienic behavior, but it's a broad spectrum of behavior, some of it which we don't even really understand today. So anyways, I can go off on these rants. The heartbeat of my apiary is breeding. And that's what to kind of give everybody an idea of what I primarily make a lot of decisions in management around breeding. So, and then at the same time, I'm doing three things. I'm producing honey. Well, I'm breeding queens and propagating queens. I'm producing honey, and we're producing bees. So I do a lot of things that normal beekeepers with just a model of just honey production and producing bees wouldn't do, because they're not breeding. They're just focused on production of a crop of honey and propagating bees for sale or for their own replacement needs in their own apiaries. I do a lot of things that would kind of be not so normal in a sense, or maybe not so wise, I guess would be the right word, if you weren't breeding. And a lot of that is I withhold a lot of treatment in my apiary because I'm breeding for resistance, and I want to keep a population of my apiary under pressure from mites to allow traits to be able to be expressed and to allow for real mechanisms to show themselves. So does that all, I don't know, hopefully that makes sense to people. It's not, I used to say it for a long time in the industry, treatment free has always been poo-pooed, and I get it. There's legitimate reasons, you know, you don't bees, if you're doing this, like on my scale, like you know, you need to do this in order, if I need to make a living, I have to have revenue coming in. I have to have bees that are alive. Dead beehives really have a hard time. It's hard to squeeze revenue and productivity or profitability out of dead bees. Anyways, I guess I can keep ranting. That's just the basic kind of who I am. I live in Plainfield, New Hampshire. I guess when I start the slideshow, I can kind of get into it. But I started my journey as a hobby and fell in love with it, grew it into what it is today. And I keep telling everybody, every year, you know, as a farmer, we start at nothing. And even as hobby beekeepers, you know, you could have the best year. You could have made the best, you could have the biggest crop of honey. Everything went textbook perfect last year, but put that on the shelf, because this year is a whole new year and you start at zero. You start at, like, you can't rest on your laurels. You have to constantly pick yourself up and keep the whole thing going, and try to keep the chaos that's always on the cusp of just exploding out of control. I'm pretty sure everyone who you know has bees that are, at least for me, and I know watching some videos on YouTube that, you know, everyone's you coming out of a winter like what I have, and it seems like everything wants to swarm right now, and there's really not a lot of feed. There's no food out, and you know, anyways, so it's like the whole apiary is at this point of like just about ready to just completely go out of control. And me, the beekeeper, I have to try to manage all these resources, all these colonies, to achieve certain ends of productivity, and that's what makes this whole thing fun. I start over every year at zero, and all the while I have to try to keep all these things that are really intense and really kind of just trying to work against my scheme, so to speak, and try to make something happen. I try to keep some level of productivity.
Like a giant chess game.
You're the man behind the curtain, you know. You're pulling the levers and trying to keep the whole thing going. So anyways, what do you guys want me to do?
Let's go ahead with your PowerPoint presentation, and we'll go through that. And then after that, we have some guests in the wings that'll be coming in, and we'll answer anybody's questions over here on the chat bar.
Okay. And I apologize too, guys. I do a lot better, you know, in a live setting. So let me get, and so I usually feedback off of people's questions, but I'm just going to go. Can you guys see the screen? Is it? I don't know.
Bring it up, Bob. Just add to the stage. Okay.
All right. And I'm going to remove me out. So it makes your.
All right. How to just hit remove as far as myself also?
Yep.
All right. I'm going to go.
All right, you guys there? All right, I'm assuming you're there. I can't hear anything, but
yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Charlie.
But when I go out, then you can't hear me talk.
Okay, but everything looks good. Like you see a slide, and I'm gonna move through it. Like you can see it. Like I can come back.
Yeah, let's see what we can do here. Okay. All right. Now go ahead.
All right. So if you guys can see the screen here, it says keep it small, keep it all. Pretty much the whole idea. Yeah. The I'll keep going for because I don't want to waste too much time. But my whole concept of keep it small, keep it all was to kind of bring back to the attention of those who are, just in just to the industry in general. There are people in general, beekeepers in general, that there's many ways to do something. I think that one thing in particular to this a population of young beekeepers or new beekeepers, this kind of fresh blood that's being injected into the industry, that especially for those that are looking to pursue beekeeping as a vocation, that there's many ways we can do this, or one can do this. You don't have to be a big migratory guy, and there's nothing wrong with that, or a girl. You don't have to be this big migratory entity, though that is, it's shown itself over the last however long it's been. That's been probably a lot, 40 or 50 years, and then some. That that we started to kind of adopt this kind of migratory commercial entity, or this way of keeping bees in a migratory way, at least when it comes to palletized truckloads of bees or whatever. But my point is that the old-fashioned way of beekeeping, as I talked about, is a very viable thing, I think, more than ever now, especially going forward as we have more people coming into the industry, looking to make income, looking to perhaps make their livelihood from bees. And there's some things obviously that play out that are necessary for one to be successful in this way of keeping bees. I think you need to first of all have a habitat, an environment that is suitable for keeping bees year round, right? You can't just be living in a virtual desert, right, of one particular crop that's flowering and gone, and then you're feeding bees pretty heavily just to keep them alive. You need to have a diversified forage. You need to have markets for your products, within some sort of easy way to transport, whether it's indirectly, but directly from you, or indirectly through other avenues. The markets for your products need to be, stable for you to justify being in that area for an extended period of time into the future. So there's all these economic and environmental, cues that one needs to take a real serious look at. But for the most part, I think in most of the Eastern United States and parts of Canada, and I'm just thinking if you're living out in the Southwest somewhere, it might be a little bit different. I live in New England, where most of the area is forested, and I have no idea what it's like to live in the desert. But I could imagine if you lived in an area where there was an extended stay of no nourishment for bees, it'd be hard to keep bees stationed in an area. You need to move them out. You need to be more migratory in a sense, or at least moving them around. So who am I? I live in Plainfield, New Hampshire, and the name of the apiary that I own and operate is Hall Apiaries, and I started doing this in 2005. I'll just keep moving here. Discovered it was possible to make a living and raise a family. And to be honest, I'll just emphasize it. I thought that was such a fascinating concept, that one could raise a family doing the work of a beekeeper. Because again, I'm a product of a generation of the way to be successful in life is to pursue a legitimate job. What is that? I don't know. That's becoming a doctor. That's becoming a plumber, an electrician, a tradesman of sorts. And the farmer, is all, at least in my neck of the woods, right? If you guys are familiar with where I live, the lay of the land is very hilly, very mountainous, river valleys. Agriculture started here. The country, the United States, was settled in this part of the world. But there's a reason when we started to move west, why it was quickly better to farm, in the Dakotas and then further west, where soils were richer, more, deeper soils, more open land. So New England still held on to its agricultural roots, but things could be done and more productive agriculturally, in a sense, further west when you got out of the mountains and out of the valleys and started farming on more of a broader, landscape. But I was just fascinated that one could do this. And I like I said, I didn't graduate high school thinking I was even, that this was even an option. I stumbled into it, and I quickly got busy in my early 20s. Building my apiary up, thinking, if this fails, I'll just find something else to do. But I just keep here I am. I just keep telling everybody I just haven't failed yet, or I haven't failed to the extent where I feel like I need to start over doing something else. So And I think that's just the mindset of most farmers I talk to. They just, if they come up against a pretty big obstacle, they just keep pressing on. And I, at this point in my life and in my career, I'll just keep pressing on. So what does my apiary look like? I manage 300 colonies for honey production. That's a nice number for me. It gives me a good crop of honey at a volume that I feel is good for me to supply my local markets for a good value. And it's nice. It's a nice number to manage with also a breeding program and also a program in my apiary where I use to raise bees for sale and for replacement. So I have 300 colonies that I used to produce honey with. We make up around 300 to 400 nucleus colonies every year. And I'll explain more how I do this here in the talk. And we run, I have 400 mating nukes. There's 2 groups of 200. And I'll explain my schedule and how I raise queens and what that looks like. And as I'd mentioned, this is just the old-fashioned way to keep bees commercially. So that's my whole point with this talk, is to tease out this concept of how to do something, not to just quickly forget about how, it was done in the past. And another thing I want to tease out is that there's things that can be done in this way of keeping bees that can't be done. And I say this with humility, right? Because there's a lot of great beekeepers that are doing this, and with thousands of beehives, tens of thousands of colonies, and they probably could do what I'm doing. Especially if they have a committed crew, maybe a family invested into the venture, they can really pay attention to detail. But my point is, I think when you do things on a smaller, more productive kind of commercial scale, you can do things that big operations can't do, and you can fill the plate. You can fill a niche in the marketplace in a way that that is necessary. That in a way that where there's a void or there's a hunger for certain things that could come out of an apiary like this, especially with a breeding program. So here's the map. That red dot's where I live. The territory where I keep bees is like a 50-mile, 60-mile radius north and south of that red dot. I also have some apiaries, some satellite locations that are to the northwest in Addison County, Vermont, right off of Lake Champlain. So if you guys are familiar with this type of, with the area over on, on Lake Champlain, it's the best way to describe that is it's like a slice of Wisconsin was picked up and dropped, right there on the shores of the Lake Champlain. You head further east of Lake Champlain and you're up in the Green Mountains. So you're quickly and heavily forested, a lot of deciduous forests, loamy clay soil, from, shale is kind of like the bedrock, I have this kind of clay, loamy soil, alkaline soil. And then if you head to the Connecticut River Valley, where I am located, where the border of Vermont and New Hampshire, there's the Connecticut River. On the Connecticut River, being a river valley, you have these, a whole span of the Connecticut River, north and south, has really sandy, loamy, well-drained soils. So for some spans of the river, you have this narrow strip of really productive habitat and bee territory. If you get further east into New Hampshire's motto is the granite state, or live free or die, but the granite state. And it's got its name for a reason. It's granite. And there's a lot of sandy, acidic soil, a little bit more. Again, it's heavily forested. I think it's 85, almost 90% forested, to give you guys an idea of what it is today. So if anyone tells you that we're cutting down too many trees, I think that's a bunch of BS. That doesn't hold any weight. There's so many trees. New England used to be completely clear cut, in the 18th, and after the Civil War and before the Civil War, and here we are today. It's like it's all grown up, and we have forests everywhere. So, anyways, you head further east, you get more acidic, sandy soil. So the habitat for a commercial apiary further east of me into the state of New Hampshire is really not very good. It's not good at all. It doesn't bode well for production of honey and just in general for bees. So there's not a lot of commercial beekeepers in the state of New Hampshire for that reason, because of the habitat and the lay of the land. Here's a good depiction of the average temperatures. And I should have, I can't remember how long this average runs for. If it's a 10-year average within the most recent recordings of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration for the United States government. But this is a general idea in degrees Fahrenheit, for average temperatures. And to be honest with you, when I looked this up, I was a little kind of saddened, because I was like, man, it's got to be colder than that in January for minimum temperatures. And again, these are averages. So, but it's not uncommon. It's normal for us, January and February to have week-long runs and bouts of sub-zero weather. I remember growing up as a kid, you'd get 30 below in degrees Fahrenheit, 20 degrees to below, and you'd have week-long stretches of where it wouldn't get above zero. But it does, I'm let's put it this way. I'll just be right out and honest with you guys. I don't believe in man-made climate change. I'm not going to argue with the fact that the climate's changing, but I have a hard time believing the politics of climate change, from a politician's perspective. But that's my little rant there. My point being is that there's definitely a change in the climate in the last couple of years, last decade. Anyway, so we do see less intense winters, more. I would just say it's not as cold. The sub-zero weather is not as long lasting as it was when I was growing up. So, anyways, there that is. Here's the management overview. There's 3 tiers of management in the apiary that I run, and this is what makes it all the more fun, all the more interesting. And I think, again, to pull on that thread of why I think that this particular small commercial scale has something to offer the industry, is because you can kind of multitask with a minimal amount of manpower. And the beautiful thing I want to articulate is that with minimal manpower, or with the sole proprietor or the owner, the person who's got their whole heart and fiber of their being invested in this business, invested in the bees, invested in their passion, it's like a tradesman it's like an artist or a tradesman who's beautifully skilled at their craft. They can do things that a lot of other people in the same trade couldn't do. Why can they do that? I don't know. They're just naturally gifted. But my point is that there's something to be said about, really kind of fine tuning your passion in your trade and who you are, pouring your kind of passion into what you do. And if you can do that in a way where it's done predominantly from you, and also relying upon work to, extra work or helpers to, or employment coming in to help execute certain tasks, then so be it. But my point is that if on a small commercial level like this, like the small scale farmer, you're paying attention to detail in the bees, in the environment. You're awake. You're sensing it. Your judgment, your intuition is all finely tuned and sharpened to make these evaluations, to make these judgments that, if you're just running a big operation with, hundreds of employees or dozens of employees, some of them, are here for a season, gone for not, but they're essentially looking at it as a job. They're just putting, they're just doing what they're told. They're not paying attention to the detail. And again, I'm not saying that that's the common thing that's happening in big commercial operations bigger than mine, but I want to pull on that thread of kind of looking at this from a small commercial operation like myself, where I can't do everything, but I can really start to pay attention to things that I think some bigger operations can't. So the 3 tiers of management are queen breeding, honey production, and nucleus colonies. And what I'm trying to do is to make all these areas of management work together and function as a cohesive unit. That's the key, right? That's the whole fun. I say that, with a sense of, humility as well, because there's times where it's complete mayhem and you're trying to keep everything going. You're trying to keep colonies in the boxes, bees from swarming to make a crop of honey, and all the while feels like the whole thing's falling apart, and you're going to be surprised if anything amounts to a crop or whatever. But every season is like that, and I don't know any farmer that doesn't feel that pressure. So every season has its own push and pull, right? The intensities of the honey flows, the intensities or the maybe the mildness of a drought or a honey flow. All those things play out on a beekeeper's decision on how to manage, on how to act on a certain decision. It's like you wake up in the morning, you had an idea what you're going to do, and you start opening some lids, and everything changed right then and there. You're no longer going to do what you got up and thought you're going to do. You're doing this now because what the bees are telling you is like they're telling you this is what you need to be doing. That's the intensity of how quickly things change on a dime, and you need to be pliable and flexible to do that. So things change every year. Every season has its own unique fingerprint. And that's why I say every year, as a farmer, as doing this as, some self-employed bozo, you start out at 0 every year. And the beautiful thing about this kind of a diversified management scheme is diversity, right? As we all know, diversity is the key to mitigating risk. That's how you survive. That's how you overcome years of hardship, years of no crops or mediocre crops, or of some sort of infection or an outbreak, with health and the loss of vigor in the colonies, is to be diversified on all scales of diversity, whether that's just in the types of bees you keep or the locations they're in, the management, all of it helps to kind of override these risks and exposure to risks. The resources are used to their greatest potential, right? So by doing this, there's nothing that is squandered. I look at every colony in my apiary, even the ones that are like right now we're coming into this, the buildup of spring. I have a percentage of my apiary that would be non-productive, right? They're not strong enough to produce honey with right now. They're healthy, but they're not going to produce honey. But what am I going to do with them? I'm going to let them build them up. I'm going to equalize them a little bit. And then a few more months from now, I'm going to turn them all into nucleus colonies, and I'll share how I do that. But so essentially, there's nothing that's kind of left to just kind of sit on the sidelines, or nothing left to just kind of get thrown out in the rubbish heap. Everything is used up and used to its potential. And this paradigm, I believe, strengthens the overall populations of bees, because with the queen breeding program, and especially with natural selection, you're tapping into something that has a huge amount of potential and unknown potential. And I think that's the thing that as farmers, as beekeepers that are really paying attention to this stuff, we all will shut our mouths pretty quickly when it comes to like our understanding of bees, right? Because there's so much we don't understand. We know enough, but we don't know anything really when it comes to the real problems. I say problems, but there's problems, and then there's unknown things that we just don't know. You know, the behavior of a honeybee colony, the behavior of individual bees within the colony, why they do what they do. There's a lot that we just don't understand and we don't know. And science, in my humble opinion, there's a religion of science, and then there's the actual science, the art of science, the practice of real science, of observation, not just, somebody who's established themselves in their career and everyone just believes every little thing that comes out of their mouth because they're the latest and greatest scientists like that. I call that the religion of science. But real scientists who have this childlike mentality, of childlike mind, of just a passion. They have the same passion the day they started in their careers, and they have that same passion the day they retire, and they just ask questions. They look at something with a degree of passion, and they want to find an answer. And they're not just out there trying to promote, their agenda or advance themselves up in the hierarchy of the industry, and then they have to pay homage to somebody else to get to where they want to go. The whole thing, right? That type of stuff sickens me, and I've seen it enough where it's just like I really don't want anything to do with it. But my point is that this whole thing through natural selection is really something that I think needs to be stated and needs to be really tapped into. And this type of management allows for that. So, and the beautiful thing about it is you only need 1 or 2 people, and you can do all the work, and you can have a lot of fun doing it. You can't really get away, for vacation, and that's okay, because I think when you set out to do this type of thing, you're not going to get away for vacation in the summer. You're going to work bees if you want to be productive. So here's some photos for honey production colonies at the beginning of a honey flow. I stock my honey production yards with around 18 to 20 colonies, mainly because, again, the valley that I'm in is just not going to support 40 colony apiaries. There's some years where they could support populations of 40 colonies, and then on average, there's some years where they're not going to. The environment's not going to support that. I'd have to feed a lot more. So I kind of cut back and just figure 20 production colonies per honey production yard. And that way, in a good year, they have plenty. And in a bad year, I'm still producing a crop, and I'm not, left high and dry. So here's a picture. Again, actually, what I'm doing is I'm showing you a picture of all 3 areas of management: honey production, nucleus colonies. I developed this. I didn't develop it. I copied and pasted this management style of nucleus colonies, and the equipment that I use is directly taken from Kirk Webster. And it works beautifully for my location and our environment with nukes, because the boxes are all, I can use this box in any area of my apiary. The feeder is just a division board feeder that moves left to right. And when I start the nukes up, like most people are familiar with, like these, double nuke boxes, that division feeder acts as a divider. And there's an entrance to the bottom and to the lower, like the lower left or the upper left and the lower right of the bottom board on the bottom board. So you have an entrance opposite each other. And then you have mating nucleus colonies. So the breeding of queen bees. This is the same equipment I was exposed to from Kirk Webster and Michael Palmer. And I believe Kirk Webster adopted this same kind of footprint from Brother Adams. And Brother Adams used Date style equipment, so bigger, deeper frames. And Kirk just said, heck, I'm going to take kind of the same kind of paradigm or the same model and just take it into Langstroth parameters and run it as these little 4-way mini mating nukes in a 10-frame box. This system has worked really well for me using this type of equipment for mating queens. I will say this: there's a lot of people that kind of like the novelty of mating nukes, and I'm always quick to tell people, unless you're raising over and if you're not catching 300 queens in a year, stay away from the mini combs, because you're not going to be able to use them in any other part of the apiary. It's they're kind of stuck in this endless loop of the mating yards, and you can move them into other parts of the apiary, but it just becomes a pain in the butt when you have to move stuff around or inspect frames, and you got these mini combs end to end trying to fill a void in a standard box. So these work great if you're trying to catch over 300 queens in a season to eliminate the bottleneck of harvesting queens. So let me just see, okay. So here, we're gonna, at the same time, what I want to do is, throughout this whole process is just go through a basic seasonal management with these 3 areas of management being emphasized: honey production, nucleus colonies, and queen breeding. So in the spring, I unpack and evaluate colonies. We're looking for the colonies that we're going to use to select breeder queens from. We're looking at, just the overall strength. I document families in my operation, or families, or what I mean by that is different daughters of breeders. So every daughter or every family line is easily identified by looking on covers or grain bags. And you can easily tell, how each family is representing itself coming through the selection of a winter, for example. You can look at, it's fun to see sometimes certain families just winter, heads and tails, or, far above other families. So it's easy for me to make a judgment call on how certain families are doing a lot better with just general vigor and health and survival over other families. And it kind of makes the decision process easy to start to say, I don't really want to propagate this particular family anymore, just because they're just becoming harder and more difficult to find every spring. So again, the whole thing about breeding is for me is to make it easy to make all these decisions by just using observation and seasonal management to kind of make those decisions by. And maybe I can tease that out here in the presentation of what that looks like even further. So as the spring goes on, honey production, in the honey production colonies, we locate breeder queens, like I had mentioned, and that's when I reverse supers. So it's funny, some years I don't reverse, right? I winter all my honey production colonies in 2 deep supers, and some years I don't reverse. Some years I do. Why? It's really kind of, it depends on how ahead of the bees I am. Like right now, we're starting to reverse colonies. Some yards we get into, you can lift the double deeps right off the bottom board, and if they're top to bottom full of bees, it doesn't matter really. But it doesn't really, for me, reversing them isn't going to do a darn bit of good if every square inch is covered in bees already. So the ones that, in that case, we're behind with those colonies. But the colonies that are in the top box, really nicely situated, you look at the bottom box and they're, maybe a half, they're just starting to occupy half the bottom box. Like that's the perfect candidate to reverse. That'll give you at least a week and a half to get ahead of them, so you can come around and maybe put some supers on at the right time. But the colonies that are top to bottom full of bees and 2 deeps right now are the ones that are just like, oh crap, we should have been here 2 weeks ago, and we're just going to have to equalize them and try to get the best we can without squandering too much of the resource for producing a crop of honey. So I reverse upon just upon observation. Some colonies don't need it if they're ahead of me, and some that I'm ahead of, I reverse, if that makes sense. So in the nucleus colonies, we winter a bunch of those. We get those unpacked, and we evaluate and feed just like every other part of the apiary. And every part of my apiary, like the nucleus colonies and the honey production colonies, are all segregated into their own yards. So you can all manage these yards, systematically. So the nucleus colonies we unpack, and right there in the yard, if we have 60 or 50 or 70 nukes in one yard, we can go through and then equalize them all together. And you're not kind of, piecemealing this to that. Everything can kind of be quickly and equally managed and equalized. And we relocate the nukes into production yards. So the beautiful thing, if you guys, I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with what nukes do to an apiary for sustainability. I haven't had to buy bees. The last time I bought bees was just probably 4 years ago. But before then, it was since I began beekeeping, really. And that's mainly because I raise my own queens and I produce, my own nucleus colonies to replace losses. So we replace all the dead outs in the honey production yards with the nukes, and all the surplus nukes that I don't need gets sold off at a premium price because they're overwintered. And production, there's not a lot of people up in this part of the world really producing bees for local sale. So, there's just a premium price on it. And the bees, obviously being in a northern climate, you can't produce bees all year round. So there's a window of opportunity for beekeepers to buy them, which kind of limits the buying power of the customer, right? They're limited to buying bees in the spring or throughout the summer. And when they can get them in the spring, and they can get them from someone like me who's raising queens and selling something local, or coming from through a winter, it just demands a premium price, and they're highly sought after. So we sell off the surplus nukes. And then as we get into the mating nukes in the spring, this is the fascinating part of my apiary. I always just love talking about, because every year I'm just amazed with how it supplies my apiary with this injection of vitality and of resources that are just, I've seen other people squandering a little bit. And then mainly with queens, or queens in the early part of the year. Queens in the part of the year for me where I can't raise them. I can't successfully mate queens in April, in any part of April. And I can't even successfully do so now. I mean, we have drones that are just really starting to build up in population in the beehives, but they're not sexually mature drones, and they won't be for another week or two. So I can't successfully mate a queen right now until the end of May. So if I needed queens, I'd have to go elsewhere in my apiary to secure those queens. And from a breeding perspective, that's a lot of work. I have to keep an eye on those queens coming in. I have to, it's a whole nother, observation kind of data set that I have to keep an eye on. So if I can secure queens from my own efforts every year, from my own breeding efforts, it just makes this, it cuts off all the input that could kind of stifle or kind of hinder my ability to make, good selection calls on breeding. So these mating nukes, if you guys remember the picture I showed you, I'm just going to back up. These mating nukes, I consolidate to that. So you can see if you guys can see my cursor, there's the feeder. I move up and down. So each 4-way mating nuke gets combined into doubles, or heck, some years I even winter them as quads, 4 ways, if the bees look nice. But my point is, I can winter these nukes just like this. And this is obviously a perfect, this is like the showpiece of what they look like coming out of winter. Sometimes they don't look like this, they're not this strong. But my point is, I have 200 or 150, or I have these queens sitting on these combs in these colonies that I can use elsewhere in my apiary. Because here it is, let's say this is, it's the first part of May, and about another month from now, another 3 weeks from now, all these queens have to come out of this equipment so that I can put queen cells in. So these queens are only kind of needed on this equipment temporarily, just to build up brood and bees for this year's round of queen breeding. So I have this giant queen bank at my disposal to use for requeening, for old colonies that have old queens that are failing, for splits on colonies that are just going gangbusters and you need to make splits. Every day I come into the mating yards, I harvest out the queens I need, I make the splits, take the splits off the bees, relocate them, and drop the queens in. And it's fun to just be able to have that. And it's a huge resource. And you can divide up, like I'm just the second bullet point, in the spring, we divide up the mating nukes into quadrants by the end of May, right? For that first round of queen cells. That's what I had mentioned, by the end of May, all these overwintered queens have to be out of here. And then my queen rearing season begins in late May. And that's just the way it goes, when the timing's right. When the bees are ready to swarm, that's when it's time to raise queens. So just a nice picture of a colony coming out of winter for those that, I thought there was another photo to that, but anyways, here we go. Queen breeding. And this paradigm, right, the small commercial paradigm sets the best stage, I think, for good selection, because again, I have the ability to kind of have a pulse on all this stuff and to look at it, to get my hands and my to get every aspect of me to really to take a look at what's going on, and it sets the stage for good breeding and natural selection, right? At the same time, in specific selection, this is another thing, right? This is the part of the new kind of tools coming online in our industry that I find so fascinating, because it wasn't available not too long ago. And I remember I felt like I was aimlessly just searching and kind of feeling out in the dark every year, because I was like, my breeding program, my selection for breeder queens was limited to queens that were 2 seasons old. They had to make it through 2 winters. They had to produce a crop of honey, and they had to have, all the characteristics, commercially viable characteristics, some, gentleness, productiveness for honey, build up, winterize, how they wintered, how conservative with resources they are, all this stuff, right? All that stuff would just be kind of the normal kind of spiel that I'd be looking for in my queens. but I always was questioning my judgment on resistance, because the only thing that I was using to judge or to measure resistance was not using treatments, and then using 2 years of survival without treatments to justify that there was some sort of mechanism, but I couldn't measure that mechanism for resistance, if that makes sense to you guys. So these new tools, like the Harbo assay and this new product, UBO, where we can go into the apiary, do the assay, and then within a little bit of time, come up with some actual data that's measurable, is just phenomenal, because it opens up a whole new world of selection. And not only that, but one where you can actually maybe stand on some solid data that's telling you that there's something here to pay attention to and to kind of nurture along. Or heck, you thought there was something here, but after doing this assay, it's telling you, yeah, maybe not. So the point I want to make with these new tools, for those that are just getting started with this whole thing, is I would strongly look at breeding. If you're really serious about breeding queens, don't just use the UBO or the Harbo assay to make that judgment call. Still give I would say, select from your population of queens that's gone through a few seasons, right? Let natural selection really play on those bees. And then once you get those queens at that age group, a few seasons of work, of industry, of winterization, or whatever it is that you're doing as a beekeeper with several seasons under their belt, put them through the fine-tooth comb of the Harbo assay and of UBO. And once those data points are there, then selective breeders. But just to take a queen, do a UBO assay or do a Harbo assay, there's nothing wrong with that. You're still going to breed good queens. But I think you're leaving natural selection out of it. At least your exposure, your beekeeping ability to judge through several years of productivity what natural selection is going to do. It's just going to help you it's going to help you, first of all, become a better breeder by looking for commercially viable stock, and to be able to make judgment calls, and by using the tools like Harbo and BSH or whatever to really further know that you're standing on some solid ground in that decision making process. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. I'll keep moving forward here. To raise queens, I use a starter finisher colony, so I'm not going to go into length with that. But for those of us who are familiar with queen breeding, with all the different, if you're familiar with the Doolittle method, where he has a starter finisher, you start the cells in a starter, and then you move them to a finisher colony, which is pretty much a big colony where the queen's below an excluder and the cells are above for finishing. I do a starter finisher all in one, and I'll explain what that is here in a minute. And I raise around 1,200 mated queens in a season, and that's a drop in the bucket, right? To be honest with you, that's nothing compared to what most queen producers and breeders are raising. But that's what I'm doing. That's my capacity with a 2-man crew and my ability to do it. And that's really the number I have a lot of fun with. I don't need to push it unless one of my kids wants to get involved in this at some point in the future and they want to take this over and run with it. Then I'd be happy with that. But for the time being, that's the number I play with. Here's some pictures of some cells. Everyone likes to see the beautiful cells. And obviously, everyone who's familiar with raising cells, the trick for cells is the copious amounts of jelly that the larvae are being fed once they pupate, because that's the whole thing that builds the ovaries. It builds queens to be these huge, massive egg-laying machines that they need to be. It builds in longevity, and obviously proper nutrition at this age of the queen's development will enable them to just develop to be the best queens they possibly can be. So you want to carry the whole apiary forward with good queens. 8-day schedule. This is what I want to spend a little bit of time sharing with you folks that makes this whole thing work, right? How do you manage 3 areas of management without kind of having the whole deck of cards, the house of cards, come crashing down on you? And the way that I've been able to do that on the small scale I've been doing it is with this 8-day schedule. And it makes it all possible. I just, again, copied and pasted this from Kirk Webster. Kirk kind of came up with this paradigm or the schedule through a name. I forget the fella's name. He's a French-Canadian beekeeper that Kirk met, and he was on a 4-day schedule. Most breeders run a 4-day schedule, but Kirk felt that the 4-day schedule was too compacted, that he didn't have enough time to run around and manage honey production and manage his nucleus colonies. So he kind of just opened it up a little bit and gave himself an 8-day schedule so that he could get around and manage the other parts of the apiary. So the 8-day schedule, in a sense, when it comes to like the different tasks and kind of this way, this mantra of how it plays out it's like this: set up, prepare, graft, catch queens, you put queen cells out, you have a day off, you work your breeder queens, you have a day off. So in this 8-day schedule, you have 2 days to get out and where you're completely, unattached from queen rearing work, but all the rest of the while you have other tasks. And the nice thing about this schedule is it makes the whole task of breeding, or I should say propagating queens, and it breaks it down into these bite-sized daily chunks that can be done easily every day, despite the conditions of the weather or of pressure in general within life. You're not amassing this huge task every day that needs to be done, and where you can almost the whole thing could fall apart if it doesn't get done that day. This schedule spreads the risk out, and it makes it possible to do everything in these manageable workloads every day they need to be done. So here it is. Here's one round of queen cells on this 8-day schedule. I'm going to explain this in a little bit, and I'll keep moving forward for the sake of time and everybody's ability to stay awake. So I start, if you're just to say like a hypothetical, let's say this is a month and a half calendar, right? You have a 31 day or 30. So let's say this is the month of May. On May, I don't know what I just did, but I did something. Hang on a minute. All right, there we go. So you have the first round of cells. Let's say the first day is setup. Well, what is setup? That's the day I go in and set up my cell builders. To simply say what that is, I find a double deep colony, with 8-9 frames of brood, and I go in and I cull all the queen cells, because you want to have some sort of impulse to swarm or some sort of natural impulse on the bee's behalf to raise cells. You don't want to. The trick to raising good cells, you don't want to have to push the bees too hard to raise the cells. If you have to push them real hard, it's like everything in farming. You're gonna be compromised all the while, and the quality and the quantity of what you're trying to produce is really going to be compromised in the end. So you need to have the bees already primed to raise the cells. So on the setup day, you want to go into these really stocked, well-provisioned colonies, 8-9 frames of brood, and you want to make sure that they're just starting to kind of get that impulse to swarm. And if they're really heavily, invested in swarming, you got capped cells or cells not rightly, on their way to being capped, that's good. You just want to make sure that they haven't swarmed, and you just cull all your queen cells, and you find your queen, and you put her in the bottom box below a queen excluder, and you keep her there. That's the task of setting up. And for every colony I set up in the future, I can graft about 48 queen cells into each colony. That's the number I graft. I'd sometimes push it to 50, but the bars I use nowadays are just the JZBZ bars. So I think that there's 15 cups on bars of 3. So if that's 48 or something like that. Anyways, so we set up on day 1, put the queen below an excluder, make sure you get rid of all the queen cells. And then you go along here. You go, what's this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days later, technically 5 days later, you work your breeder queens. Well, what does that mean? I find all the breeders in the apiary in the spring, all the ones that meet the criteria for breeders, and I bring them back to the apiary. I do all the cell building, and I confine the breeders onto equipment where they're confined to 3 frames. For those that have been doing this type of work with breeding, you understand what I'm talking about. So essentially what I'm trying to do is make the work of looking for the right age larva easy for me on the day that I graft. So I confine the queen in a 10 frame box, but she's confined to 3 frames to one side of a queen excluder, right in the box. So every 8 days, or essentially to give you an idea, after I set up a cell building colonies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days after setting up, I go into my breeder colonies and I give the breeder queen an empty, dark, drawn comb, so that day she can lay eggs. And then coincidentally, if you just count 4 days after that, right, what happens 4 days after a queen lays an egg? You have a larva that's just hatched, and you can guarantee that larva is within the window of time that you'll get the best larvae for raising queens, that 12 to 24-hour-old larva floating in jelly. And the nice thing about confining the queen onto one frame is you limit the amount of brood available in these colonies, so that every egg that hatches is just has this huge workforce of nurse bees to supply the larva with jelly. So the day you graft, you don't need to prime cells. You don't need to get jelly. People ask me, do I prime my cells that I graft? And it's like, I don't need to. The larvae are swimming in jelly, and you just have to scoop up the jelly with the larvae when you graft, and they're fine. So anyways, let me back up. So you work breeders. After you work breeders, this is day, as you can see, day on the 10th of the month of May here, hypothetical May, I call it, is the day I call prepare. This is an optional task, but it was just kind of a part of the schedule. So if on the grafting day, which is the next day, I have inclement weather, rain, whatever, just it's going to be horrible weather to work bees in, I'll take advantage of this day to prepare. And what preparing is going in back into these cell builders I set up 9 days ago and going through and culling all the queen cells, because these bees still want to swarm. They still have that propensity to swarm, but you want to keep them from swarming. So you go and cull the cells. The super that's above the excluder, because remember the queen's below the excluder, that upper super, you pull out 2 frames, and you're making room for your graft, and you're going to make room for a frame of packed pollen, freshly packed pollen. And that's all I do to prepare. I just kind of carve out some space for the graft. I go through each colony, make sure there's no cells. That's really the most time consuming thing of preparing, is just going through the frames, making sure that they're not raising any cells. Because obviously, if you've done the work of raising queen cells, anything that hatches before your cells, you will have a virgin that goes through and just destroys every cell, or compromises most of your cells when you need them the most. And so you need to make sure you have, you do the due diligence to make sure that you are, you are staging everything to work in your favor. So prepare day, the day of preparation is an optional day. If I have a nice day on the grafting day, I do that work all together, the day that I graft. And what does that look like? So the day you graft, I start this out in the morning so I can be done, this whole thing by, the middle part of the day, or, a little after midday. I go early in the morning and I go through each colony, cull the queen cells if I haven't prepared the day before. If I prepared the day before, really all I'm doing now is taking the queen in the bottom box and taking her off the hive stand, or out of the hive completely. Just take the doublets, because I'm working with 2 deep supers at this point for a brood nest. The bottom deep she's in is placed on its own bottom board, turned 180 degrees behind the colony, facing the opposite direction of the queen, of the original position, or the original hive stand. If you really wanted to, you could move the whole thing out of the apiary, but it just takes too much time to do that. So I leave them all, in the apiary, the queen right section of the cell builder, if you will. And what I do in the super above the excluder is at the same time, there's a little bit of honey coming in, and you have some supers of nectar that aren't quite ripened into honey. I put a nice super of honey, or nectar that's not ripened into honey, right on the bottom board. And that's just a little bit of stimulation for them to work that nectar up, to move it up, to consume it, to get them, really excited for raising cells. And I put that deep super on top of an unripened super of nectar that they're ripening into honey. And what I do from here now is shake about 5 to 6 frames of nurse bees out of the queen right super, where the queen is, back into the queenless, what is now the cell builder. And essentially, if you don't have enough nurse bees to really get a nice boiling population of young bees desperately or hopelessly queenless, you go to other colonies to do that. But when you're doing this whole thing on brood nests that are made up of 8 or 9 frames of brood, I often never have to go searching for nurse bees elsewhere, because there's plenty in the colony. So I shake about, like I said, 5 to 6 frames of nurse bees out of the queen right super into the cell builder, and then I let the whole thing sit for a few hours. That's the trick too. You want these bees to recognize their state of queenlessness, and you want them to cry out for mercy. You want them to say, "Give me whatever you got. We just want a larva. Give us something. We need a queen." So at that point, after a few hours, you come into the bee yard and they're just crying for a graft, and you give it to them. You graft the larvae from the breeder queens. You drop the grafts into the cell builders. And like I said, I can get about 48 cells, 48 grafts in each cell builder. So you just do the math of how many queen cells you need. I usually try to graft into about 6 cell builders every 8 days to give me the number of cells I need. And that's the grafting day. That's probably the most, like, out of the whole queen rearing kind of schedule, that's the day that gets kind of eaten up the most with queen rearing tasks. So after grafting, you have some time, right? Those cells have now got to be drawn out, that they got to feed those larvae, 5 days later after you graft. If you do the numbers, so if you're looking at a 4-day-old larva here, you got 4. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You got those cells will be capped, on the 15th, 16th, or that 9th, 8th day after the graft, or after you graft. So what you can do at this point you can reunite the queen if you didn't want to, make a split. Let's say the queen right section, you could essentially just walk away with it somewhere, make a split out of them. But if you want to reunite the queen to the cell builder, you have to have a finishing colony. All you do is, you can move some young larvae, some eggs and larvae up next to the graft, just to keep some nurse bees up there, and put the queen back below the excluder on the original stand. And then you're looking at, essentially 10 days after you graft, you have 14-day-old cells. That's when I move those cells out into the mating yards. And after you put them out, you put the cells out in the mating yards. 15 days later, I come back to catch queens. So that's one cycle of queen rearing, of raising queens. You know, some people ask me, why can't I leave the cells out in the mating yards longer and the mating nukes longer? And the answer to that question is because the schedule that I'm on really doesn't bode well for that. The queen cells, we catch the queens, you know, 15 days after we install the cells, and then the next day, literally, I have cells coming ready to replace the queens we catch out. So the queens have got to come out for new cells to go in. And it's in my history of doing this works really well because, again, most of the queens I'm using in-house. So the queens are literally being taken out of the mating nukes. They're confined to queen cages for just a day or two, and then they're reintroduced back into the nukes, you know, a few days later to begin laying again. So they're not sitting without laying for too long. Here's what this schedule looks like if you wanted to do multiple rounds of queen rearing. If you looked at queen rearing like baking, you know, a batch of cookies or something, you know, if you wanted to make 3 batches of cookies, you just kind of follow the recipe and repeat it 3 times. So with queen rearing, you do the same thing with the schedule. You take the same schedule there and repeat it, and it's staggered, right? So let's say, you know, here we are, the first day you set up, and then what you have is 8 days later, you set up the second round. 8 days later, set up the third round. 8 days later, set up the fourth round. And you do that until you have all the numbers of queens secured in your operation. And if you look again, you can see like, okay, so you set up the second round, and then you know, every 8 days you graft, every 8 days you catch queens, every 8 days you work your breeder colonies. So you're on this 8-day, that's why it's called the 8-day cycle. So hopefully you guys are following that logic here. But the beautiful thing about the schedule is, again, it gives me the ability to raise queens on a really nice kind of way, and then manage other parts of the apiary simultaneously, right? Because as I mentioned before, the whole part of this thing is to manage these 3 areas of management harmoniously, and where they complement one another. And that schedule is what does that. So I'm going to keep moving along. What makes this whole thing work? Summer, we get into production colonies for producing honey. We continue to add supers as needed. We address swarming as needed. People ask me, well, how do you manage, you know, what's my swarming protocol to mitigate swarming? And I'll tell them it depends on how I'm feeling and, you know, what the bees are doing. Because there's some years it doesn't seem to matter what the heck I'm doing. I always lose more than I'd like. But the trick is in the beginning of the season to get started and implement real management, staying ahead of those bees to keep them from swarming. If you're managing a population of bees that's always ahead of you, that's poor management for swarming to begin with. So my basic kind of premises is just to give them brood, to expand the brood nest to the point where they're not constantly encumbered by honey and nectar, you know, primarily nectar, confining the queen to lay. That's what I believe is the impulse from nature given to the bees to start that swarming process. So if you can keep the brood nest open, then they get to work with putting up honey. You won't have a swarming problem as if you just, you know, paid no attention to that. So we address, you know, all those things, and we continue to add supers to the honey production colonies. And this is really where the next phase of management comes into play wonderfully for me. The nucleus colonies, we begin making up nukes once the queens become available. And we start that process about the middle of June, because my first round of queens is typically, you know, caught out of the mating nukes about the 12th or the 13th of June. And shortly thereafter, a day or two later, we're busy making up the first round of nukes. And here, like I mentioned, not much is wasted in the apiary, because if you remember how I mentioned at the beginning of the spring, all those colonies that weren't strong enough to sell, they weren't strong enough to make honey with at the time, but we could equalize them with a few frames of brood just to keep them viable. It's kind of like succession, you know, if you're planting a crop of any sort of vegetable or, you know, row crop or something, and you want to do succession plantings. I look at those colonies in the beginning of the season for making nukes as if they don't need to be strong in the spring. I don't want them to be strong, you know, boiling over with bees in the spring, because they're going to swarm on me before I can take advantage of them at their most optimal time for making nukes. So I let them kind of be, you know, on this weaker schedule. They're kind of behind schedule from all the other parts of my apiary, so they can build up at the right time where they have the most amount of brood to make nukes with, because that's really all I care about is the brood. And a little bit of honey is helpful, but I want brood out of those colonies, and I don't want them to swarm before I'm ready for them. So we use these weaker overwintered nukes, right, to make up our nukes, and I let them build up. What I like to do is set aside around 70 to 80 of these overwintered nucleus colonies that are not, you know, that are kind of like the dinks of the operation, right? They're healthy, but they just were a little weak. But by the middle of June, a percentage of these weaker colonies are now built up nicely into 3 deeps, 2 deeps, but they're now starting to, you know, have a brood nest that's consisting of maybe 6, 7, 8 frames of brood. And most of them actually get into 3 deeps. And by the middle of June, that's perfect, right? So they're at that point in time, they're right at the cusp of starting to initiate the swarming process. And that's when we get busy of finding those colonies in this population we're managing for nuke production, and we just deconstruct them. And what does that mean? I go through the whole colony, and we just divide up all the brood, all the honey. We get rid of the queen, and we turn it into nukes. And in a good year, for every colony, we can make up 6 nukes. So it's a ratio, you know, of 6 to 1. So you can just do the math. For me, if I have 70 nucleus colonies, and we are to, you know, figure 6 to 1, what's that? 70 and 6, that's a 420 nukes. So that's really all I'm trying to make up anyway. So that number of colonies, you know, 70 to 80 will cover my butts. In a bad year, we can make up 4 or 5 nukes per colony just because of the amount of brood available. But you guys get the idea of how to do this. And the beautiful thing, the fun thing about this, if you got all these, I call them nuke mothers. If you have them all in one location, or, you know, maybe a few locations to spread them around, but you show up to make nukes, everything's right in the same yard. All you have to do is just get busy at dividing up the brood, finding queens, you know, dividing up the honey, and you can make, you know, 100 plus nukes and before lunchtime. And it's really, you know, really easy work to do that. And we start nukes with a frame of honey, 2 frames of brood, or a frame and a half of brood. What I mean by that is a nice frame of cat brood and a nice frame of, you know, eggs, larvae, frame of pollen, a frame of, you know, eggs and pollen or whatever. And then we give them a frame of foundation. So 4 frame nucleus colonies made up in that way. And we try to make 400 up before the middle of July. So while they're on the honey flow. And this is a nice picture of some production yards. This is a nuke yard. This is taken a long time ago when I was just kind of getting things built up. This is what Michael Palmer became kind of famous with his, you know, 4/4 colonies that everyone's, you know, resource. I forget the name. There's so many names now to describe this, but I used to use these exclusively in the yards to make nukes, and I backed away from it now because it's a pain in the butt for me to transfer these frames of brood and bees out of the spring into 10 frame equipment to produce honey with them. I make all my nukes now primarily on this equipment. So that essentially what happens is when they become really strong in one box, 2 nukes to 1 box, I transfer 1 nuke out and give it its own box, you know, to expand into. And again, we make up around 5 batches of nukes. So what happens sometimes in the beginning of the year, knowing that, you know, 90% of the time, the first 2 rounds of nukes, you typically get onto 8 combs. So that's this whole box of the feeder before the end of the year. I just typically make them all up in 1 box and keep the feeder, you know, to one side. And so they kind of get nice and built up on 4 combs. And once they do that, they get well provisioned with 4 combs. We expand the feeder over, give them the rest of the, you know, 4 combs to expand onto. But as we begin to get towards the end of June and early part of July, I like to make 2 in a box so that if the flow fails or if the, you know, conditions for them to expand really don't persist, they aren't compromised by being spread over too much space, and we can keep them housed, these nucleus colonies, on the right space for them to be really productive with for wintering. And for just health, I find that there's something special about bees occupying a cavity and really filling it nicely with bees, but not having that huge propensity to swarm, you know, easily found with, in particular, to nucleus colonies. If the shoe fits nice, like this picture depicts, nicely covered combs of bees filling the whole cavity nicely, they just can really take out any sort of infection with chalk brood, with European foul brood, anything that is kind of in the environment for viral or fungal infections. With a nice population and a good diet, they are at the best position to take care of those infections. Where if I find that if I spread these bees and try to get them to, you know, draw out more comb than they're stimulated to, they seem to kind of be exposed to those pressures a little bit more. So that's what the nukes look like when we make them up. That's what they look like when they're expanded in these 10 frame singles with the feeder. Here's a nice picture of a honey production yard on the flow, or towards the end of the flow in the summer. Late summer harvest. I just want to keep pushing on here so we can get to the end of the talk. So we begin to harvest honey. We're starting to be done with queen rearing at this point, but I begin to look at the honey crop and decide, you know, how big of a crop gets me determined how early to start to harvest, so that we can still continue on in the fall without continuing, you know, to be compromised by harvesting the crop of honey when other things have to be done. But so goes the whole, you know, battle with, you know, trying to manage 3 things at once. We begin to harvest the honey in August, and we perform. I have this bullet point because at the beginning when I made this slideshow, this was something I was doing at the time that I no longer really do anymore. And this is something that it's really profound to me because, again, there's so many things that are changing in our industry, but mite washes, I have a hard time with them nowadays because I really think that mite washes, and I say this with humility, guys, please don't, think that I have it all figured out, because I don't. But from what I'm seeing in my insignificant kind of wisdom of beekeeping is I think our bees are too weak. And I'm saying, again, if you have, the fact is, right, for the most part, one of my point is, if you take a wash and you're getting 300 bees with an infestation rate of 3%, and your bees are crashing, we got to do better than that. I'm sorry, I hate to say that, but that is a result of holding things back, in my humble opinion. We have to have colonies that can take a 3% infestation of varroa mites and be able to deal with it, not fall apart, right? We don't want PMS, deformed wings, brood that's just completely falling apart because of 3% infestation. In my humble opinion, I think this idea of maintaining 1% infestation rates, it's not doing the industry any good, because all we're doing is we're providing the future of bee, we're slowing down the ability for bees to be able to, it's like a resistance mechanism. If you can't resist 1%, how in the heck are you going to resist 3%? And in my operation, I can have plenty of colonies crashing at 3%, but a good percentage of them are still doing fine at 3%. I find that the magic number, to be honest with you, where there's real pressure from varroa mites and where you're starting to see PMS and the expression of deformed wing virus and all the fun stuff that comes with high mite predation, is at that 5 to 7% infestation. Just under 10%. 10% is in my opinion what would, if you're not going to make a decision on doing something about mites at 10%, you got dead bees walking. But at 5 to 7%, I find is that threshold. And I think 3% is too low. And to be honest with you, if you got 1% infestation rates in the spring and you're worried about your bees collapsing, I get it, because most of the times that's just, it's history is proven right now that economically that's not good. But my point is that the bar is set too low in our industry for mites, because we're taking the easy route too often with just using the silver bullet to eradicate mite populations to zero. And instead of maintaining some sort of semblance of a population of mites to keep bees under pressure, they can't handle anything. So I'm saying this with humility. And again, another thing that I have a hard time with washes is that it's hard to measure VSH expression, trait selection with mite washes. And what do I mean by that is, if, for example, I've seen this, and my good buddy Corey Stevens has seen this with VSH traits expressions in the colonies. Let's say we do an alcohol wash and we have 15% mite infestation, and you also do a Harbo assay, and you find out that you have no reproductive. I'm not going to explain what the Harbo assay is, but my point is that you can have a very high scoring VSH colony with a very high mite load, and if you were to just wait, right, that's the thing that most people can't do, because you can't make the decision after the fact. You have to do it. You have to be preventative in all this, which I totally get. But my point is that the mite wash is not telling you if you have VSH expression just by mite populations. It's telling you that you have an infestation at this number, but it's not going to tell you what the bees might be able to do about that. And that's the whole thing with breeding for resistance, is to get bees to be proactive and defensive about varroa mites, both on the front and back end of mite infestations, right? You have bees drifting, bringing in mites. So with VSH or colonies that have resistance, you would think that we want bees that can take mite levels down when that infestation starts to climb up. And we want bees that can keep mite infestations at an economic threshold. Again, in my humble opinion, that's higher than 3%. It might be lower, it might be, but I think in all honesty, it should, they should be able to hold that 3, 5, 7% infestation and bring it down, or, just control that population on their own. I can get lost in the weeds with explaining this, but to give you guys an idea, this is the whole thing. This is where I make my decisions on management on other parts of my apiary. What I mean at the beginning of the talk, I'm willing to sacrifice percentages of my honey production colonies for this endeavor to push for mite selection, because I'll go and we'll harvest the honey off these colonies we're making honey with. And it's very easy some years to see that I have dead beehives walking if I don't treat them, within the next couple of days or the next week or so. And it's very easy to see, okay, these colonies, and again, it's easy to see that these colonies have mites, but they're not at death's door yet. They're not there. They have some more time to kind of prove to me if I need to apply that treatment. And so I dance this really crazy line where a lot of people don't, and I can understand because of time and just management. I can kind of let things ride and it requires a great deal of time and attention to do that. So again, that's the thread I want to pull on the beautiful thing about being this small commercial operation, that I can do these things and flex a little bit more than the bigger operations can't, because they just have numbers and a schedule, and they can't flex like I could, or like people could on a smaller scale. I just want to put that information out there, and that mindset to help people maybe see something a little bit differently, and help kind of nurture this kind of thing along, to see if there's others that might want to, kind of pursue this craziness with me. And anyway, so we expand the nukes as we needed. Late in the summer, we need to keep ahead of the nukes. We want the nukes to be well provisioned and well situated in equipment. And we stop the queen rearing. It comes to an end in August, and the whole schedule comes to an end, which is a huge weight load off of the whole system. So for me and my personal, it's just like you're on this machine, and it's nice to step off and feel like you have a normal life a little bit outside of just constantly sticking to a queen rearing schedule. So we just harvested some honey off of these bees, put them on the truck, harvesting some honey off of these bees. So I must say, in my early days, this is the way I did it, right? My back did all the work. You put the escape boards on. I didn't put the escape boards on by taking every super off and putting every super on. I had this way to tip supers forward and slide the escape board under, pull the excluder out. Anyways, but my point is that now I'm starting to mechanize, and I should have started mechanizing earlier, but again, it's one of those things we all start to kind of reprioritize things as when we start to smarten up. But I wish I mechanized, lifting and infrastructure to move stuff in and out of my apiaries on my truck a little earlier on in the game. But anyways, got this nice cowan system a few years ago. It's made extracting honey really a lot of fun. It's minimized the time. So anybody that's really big into production for honey on the scale that I'm doing it at, which is again, a very, very small commercial scale, very, very small commercial scale. This is a 28 frame system, cowan system, that is really efficient, really nice machine to work with. And it really just makes the whole process of getting honey out of the combs and into drums, really nicely. And you can do the whole thing with minimal manpower. So in the fall, we feed colonies, right? We need to get everything prepped for winter. So 2-to-1 sucrose syrup is being fed. And one of the things that I kind of do is we weigh the hives to determine how much feed they need. I learned this information from Michael Palmer. It saved me a small fortune in buying sugar, because, some of these colonies can take everything you can give them, but they don't need it all. So, we weigh, my target weight for 2 deeps is at 125 to 130 pounds. And that's essentially weigh the bottom board, the 2 deep supers, and the inner cover. And we want the whole thing to weigh it, we weigh that. That's the target weight. It's 130 pounds. And for every gallon of 2-to-1 we give them, we get about 7 pounds, roughly, around 7 pounds of weight gain. And the trick for me is to feed gallons, right? Not just this little mason jar at the entrance that most people, on a hobby scale are familiar with. I always tell people bees need that hoarding instinct to take the syrup and put it in the combs and not consume it, and feed it to brood. They need to be enticed to put it in the combs, to ripen it, to put it away for future use. We put the mouse guards in, and we begin finish feeding by mid-October, typically early October. Mid-October is when things are, I'm trying to push it to the limit, but early October to get that syrup ripened and where it needs to be. Some pictures of some nukes going into the winter with some pollen patties. Nutrition is a big thing, guys. I know I'm not the only one touting that, but you got to pay attention to what's going on with pollen and honey, nectar coming in. And whenever there's deficiencies and you're trying to keep a population of bees moving forward, you got to step in. Otherwise, things fall apart. And anyways, I have a whole story around that, but some feeder cans. Here's a picture of the 4-way mating nukes going into the winter. This is a perfect example of what I like to see them look like if I want to winter them as quads. These little 4-way quadrants. Nicely situated with bees. They kind of cohesively function as one colony, divided up into 4 sections. But, they're like little bonsai beehives. They winter beautifully, just like this. And you have 4 queens in one box coming into the spring, if you're successful. And we prepare the colonies for winter. We begin wrapping by October, where I like to be done by November, because typically by, a little before Thanksgiving around here, if not sooner, we have snow. And typically by that time, once the snow is on the ground, it's not going away. And it gets really hard to finish the job of packing the bees away with snow on the ground. So we do all that fun stuff with getting them packed away with insulation, some blue board on the top, and tar paper. There's a little bit of blue board, and we wrap the nukes to pallets, just on a standard pallet. I have these little tar paper wraps that I use to kind of pack them all together with entrances all exposed under and onto the underneath. They fly out under the pallets into the outside perimeter of the pallets. We give them a roof of a heavier weight tar paper with the lids on, and we tie them down. And that's the winter. That's one season. And what do? We rest and we repair and make equipment in the winter. I can get off on a whole talk, but for the sake of time, I make my own foundations. I've been doing it for the last few seasons now, and it's been a lot of fun. Just for those, if they want to ask questions, I can help you save a lot of time and energy. If you wanted to make small, foundations, I typically we'll make 1,500 to 2,000 sheets on average of deep foundation every year for in-house use. And we're always trying to improve. I'm always thinking of how can I do things more efficiently, more better, not just kind of squandering resources, but how can I improve upon things? And, are there certain things I have to let go, right? What am I doing that's not working that I need to do, implement something new, and not just stick with something that's familiar and used before in the past, but I need to constantly allow time and space and energy to influence me to do something new. So there's the picture of the foundations getting prepped, but that's the talk, guys. Let me do this real quick. I'll stop sharing. Let me know if someone's there.
Charlie, you click them. I'll hands off it. Yeah, that was very interesting. It's fast paced, right? Because there's a lot of information to cover. I was watching the chat there, and everybody's talking about their weather and everything, and it makes me wonder: are they even hearing what's being put down sometimes? But
I apologize if I pushed it along, but I just for the sake of the time and respecting that. But there's just so much, right? And it's maybe I bit off more than I can chew, but hopefully it was useful to you guys.
Yeah. Brad, just your mic. I don't think it's picking up your breathing or something.
Yeah. There you go.
There we go. Well, we got Brad here, the bee man from Faith Apiaries up in Manitoba, Canada. And Todd is Loma Vista Bee Company. He is out in California around Fresno area. And he's, Brad's got, usually has 150 hives or more.
Usually. Not right now.
And Todd, I don't know, he's what, 50 to 100, somewhere in that neighborhood?
I'm at 72 right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And all that.
Is so, with the topic of mite resistant bees there, we've been trying for a long time, right? To find that sweet spot.
Can you send James the link? I sent it to him, but he didn't get it or something.
Check your email, James.
Maybe he got the wrong address. I don't know.
But in regard,
you guys go ahead. I'll see if I can get that to James.
Okay. We've been trying for years, right, to propagate mite-resistant bees, and at some point you have to wonder: are we propagating stronger mites? Right, because we've noticed amitraz resistance, right, and so the mites are getting stronger as well as the bees. So, are we actually, with the cause and effect of treating for mites, are we actually breeding stronger mites as well? It just kind of light flashed on when you were talking about it, with the UBO and the testing and how things have progressed over the years. That, yep, we're getting better, I think, on the mite resistance portion of the test, but are the mites getting better at being resistant to the stuff we're throwing at them as well? So that's kind of there's a reason why we got to keep changing what we're doing, because they keep changing what they're doing. And I think nature has a way of averaging itself out, right? There, as well as, people always say, well, bees, feral bees have the best resistance, right? Well,
No.
You've heard it, though. You've heard it.
Yeah.
Someone say it, right? So we don't necessarily know that's true. However, we do know that in the bees that we've been treating for years and years, that we haven't eradicated the mite. So does that mean the mites might be adapting as well? So
And one way I'd look at that, and you might, I think you probably agree with me. Like we're not going to eradicate the mite, right? The mites, you can't. They're here to stay. Like they're not going anywhere. So it's you have to kind of ask the right. You kind of have to frame your mind, right? Ask the right question. It's like, how do you coexist with this parasite, right? Because it's just not going anywhere. It's proven itself. You know, if you're going to kill the mite, you're going to eradicate honeybees at the same time. So the idea is like, how do we begin to manage, and how do we begin to propagate or breed for this equilibrium, like you said, where nature kind of averages everything out in the future. And to be honest with you, everything's kind of like a theory, right? Because the future is before us. It's always in front of us. We're never. To be honest with you, I don't know if we ever will arrive. I say that with humility again. I think if you look at what we've done in the last 20 years, if you've been, obviously it looks like some of you guys have been keeping bees longer than I have, but if you just remember what VSH was 20 years ago, 20 years ago, VSH was this new thing. And the industry kind of was looking at it, and a lot of people got some VSH stock in, and they said, well, it's too much hygienic behavior, because all they do is just pull out the brood, and it inhibits populations. It inhibits, obviously at the same time with decreased populations, it might stifle honey production. So VSH in the same time in the last 20 years has come a long way. But if you just look at the what we've come up with for just some stock improvement plans, right? Like what do we have today? It's great. It's improved greatly than what it was just 30 years ago. So there's improvement. And I think what needs to happen is just more people need to be invested into nurturing and propagating that type of genetic material into the industry and into the environment. And again, I what do I know? But I can't help to think that with more apiaries on the scale that I'm running, where they're small scale, or even the larger guys, they can contribute the way to whatever they can. But the more you have these types of traits, and essentially if every beekeeper could say, you know what, I went from treating my apiary 6 times in a season, and now I'm only using 2 treatments, and I'm just and I'm having mortality rates that are acceptable to me, that's a huge improvement. Like I'm trying to be realistic. It's like I'm not trying to say that everybody eventually to get to no treatment would be wonderful, but I just don't know if that's realistic. It's almost kind of like looking at kind of like how we medicate ourselves. You shouldn't have to be on ibuprofen you shouldn't have to manage pain like that, right? Unless there's something going on, which I get it. But in a healthy scenario, you want to be able to wean yourself off of some sort of thing, right? For longevity. And I look at that with mites. You want to be able to find, okay, if I'm treating 6 times a year, and in the course of implementing some breeding program, or maybe introducing some good stock, I went from 6 treatments to 3 treatments, or 6 treatments. Even heck, if you could eliminate 1 treatment, I think that's a step in the right direction. And I think that's what our industry really needs. And here's another thing. I keep thinking about this. I don't know if beekeepers are ready for that type of a mindset, because just imagine, right? We're in our bees, we're working, when you start to see an issue, how many of us are just ready to not intervene, right? Like you can't, you need to make a decision often now, and you can't wait for tomorrow, because if you wait, it's too late to fix the problem, right? So it's the double-edged sword. My point is I think as beekeepers, we almost need to kind of allow some sort of exposure personally of what it's like to kind of just say, hey, what are these bees going to do? Especially if they're showing signs of resistance. Like, okay, well, I'm just going to take a population, and instead of treating them with everybody else, I'll withhold the treatment and see what they look like. And I know that's kind of reckless to some people, and I understand why it would be. But if you have the ability to play in that parameter and see what happens, and kind of let the bees present themselves, maybe there's something that would be gained from exposing kind of yourself and your bees to that. That's kind of been the way I've always operated, is just kind of more truly like an IPM approach of treatment. Chemical intervention is the absolute last bus stop, to get out of town for the mites, so to speak. And I understand that's not realistic for everybody, but I don't know. You guys understand where I'm coming from in a sense?
Something that we've talked about here recently, and Bob has mentioned, is seem like our bees do better in fresh equipment.
Yep.
And you were talking about that with Dr. Lamas on that one video here I just watched, where you were questioning, is the viral load
Oh gosh.
and
Yeah.
all that stuff, is it living within the combs, from year to year, or building up? Has anybody really looked at that kind of?
Yeah, no, there's been, I've talked to several, I mean, I don't, again, I'm saying this all with some expansive amounts of humility because I don't know everything, right? But I remember I had a huge collapse in my apiary a few years ago. And I reached out to some folks in the industry and said, hey, I got all this comb, void of bees right now. But what are viruses? And this is just 5 years ago. And I asked a couple of people, what are viruses actually lingering in the combs? Should I be doing something to maybe burning a bunch of equipment and replacing it with some new stuff? And the few people I talked to, it honestly said, we don't know enough right now. Or even if, so one guy said, actually that from all of the current research at the time, it's not showing that, viruses are actually, living past, the mortality of the bees themselves. So there was this undecided kind of what at the time seemed to be, kind of undecided. But again, maybe certain viruses, you can't help to think that there's probably certain things that could hold over. And there's probably things that are dying, once the host or once there's no bees for the viruses to live in, they'll probably die as well.
Megan Caldwell's research showed that there definitely is a buildup on the comb of viruses, and the recommendations off of that was to not just dump new bees on dead out equipment if it was mites and viruses that killed the colony. And now the recommendation there out of that research really was just time. Her research showed that temperatures and irradiations and stuff like that really either weren't effective or weren't an economically viable solution for that, and it was just time. How much time? Well, we don't really know. More than a month is what we actually just was just on an email thread between Ian and Dr. Curry about this, and that was basically the information was, more than a month, but don't necessarily just dump new bees on old comb if it was mite infestation that killed that colony.
Yeah, there's a lot of unknown. I think that's the thing too. There's a lot there's so much kind of field of study and just bee viruses and how it works and how I like in that video that I had recently on my page on YouTube with Dr. Lamas is, you have the viruses, but what about the environmental impacts and the synergistic kind of things happening in the combs from all the exposures to fungicides, pesticides, herbicides, all the things that are in the environment that are not good for bees. What happens, as that stuff comes back, as it comes back and it's in the bee bread, it's impregnated into the wax. Kind of like Bob Benny's talk on the synergistic reactions to chemicals, in the environment, let alone what the beekeepers are using and how that might play out to the
Combinations
exposure.
Are endless.
Exactly. And nobody's
so difficult.
You got it. And I've always been kind of more sensitive to that reality because of just how pervasive that reality is. Nobody's measuring that stuff. And it's happening. So I think I would agree. And I think it's just common sense to have a serious program where you're moving out that old comb on some sort of a regular basis, some percentage every year.
Well, it's recommended 5% per year up here. So
now this is James. He's in Alberta, Canada. You're going up, about 2,000 colonies you're going to get up to about this year, maybe?
Well, I don't think I'm going that high.
Well, he was at 300 and then he sold some, and I think he's going to be up around 1,000 or so.
We'll see where we're going.
We'll see how it does. He's
I wish I had your optimism, Charlie.
Yeah. Well, you're pretty darn good at it. I'll tell you, some of them 6 when you got a nuke that's 6 frames of 5 out of the 6 are slab brood, and the other was just, different stages of larvae. That's pretty darn good, I think. It's some beautiful looking stuff you got. But James went down came in the United States, went way down south and got himself a 60 frame Cowan. He's going to be refurbing here. And I know that you got your Cowan, and he's got the same wax spinner that's kind of sits off to the side. Anything that, I kind of brought you guys together to say, hey, compare notes as far as maybe Troy, you have say, hey, look out for this or that, because this is kind of a issue with that machine or something like that. I don't know if there is any, but
I was going to say we'll get to the machines in a minute. I want to go back to one of the things that you said about some of my 6 frame colonies. So listening on Troy's speech there earlier about selection of genetics. So that's kind of what I've been doing. I mean, I bring in a breeder queen every year, or 1 or 2. It depends as to what I need for my genetics, but I don't bring that into my apiary or into my colony until I see what those genetics are.
Yeah.
But you had mentioned those 6 frame nukes, Charlie. So if you go back and take a look at that video that I transferred that 6 frame nuke on, I guess that was Easter. So I breed for genetics, and I'm always looking for genetics for those queens that explode. So I've been working a shutdown for the last few weeks, but Alan went in and took a look at that 6 frame nuke. I guess it would have been last weekend. And that 6 frame nuke has now filled the 10 frame box. She's filled the double above it, and that box was full of swarm cells. So to go back to what Troy was saying, the selection of what you're looking for your genetics and always bringing that back into your apiary and I don't have quite the mite problem that maybe some people have, but good to go back to your point, Troy, that you were saying in there, select for your genetics, and you don't necessarily always need those expensive breeder queens and stuff. I bring them in just simply for some diversity, but it really hits home to what you were saying, and that's kind of what I've been doing here for the last 4 or 5 years now, I guess. So
I can't help to think that the biggest improvement, if you're really serious, I always tell myself this, if you're serious about what you're doing as a beekeeper and you fail to raise your own queens with any sort of serious and earnestness, then you're doing yourself a disfavor, really, by entrusting that work to somebody else. If you're not if you don't really know what type of a person or what type of bees that you're inheriting, when it comes to queens from somebody else. If you're just buying a queen for the sake of plugging it into some brood and increasing your colony numbers, you're really not doing yourself a favor unless you're looking to kind of quickly unload those bees onto somebody else, right? But if you're looking for that population to establish itself for production of honey and to be kind of these perennial beehives in your operation, if you don't have a good pulse on that, like you mentioned, James, if you don't have a good pulse on that, on what the potential kind of productivity or behavior, what those bees are, by breeding them in house, I think as a beekeeper we can be doing ourselves a disservice.
Yeah, and I won't dump my queens off. These guys give me a hard time. I'll pinch a queen in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
If it's not what I'm looking for or not what I want, and now, interesting enough, I spent all day today in the wood shop. Clear, beautiful blue skies. It was 18 degrees here today, and I spent it in the wood shop. But the reason I did that is because I have to set up my starter finisher tomorrow, and I needed the nuke boxes, or the mini mating nukes, and more specifically the frames. So I started at 7 o'clock this morning, and I finished just when Charlie came on here at 6. But I did manage to get 1,700 frames cut out. So it was a busy day, but I need those frames for this weekend because I'm starting to graft. So
yep.
Well, Troy, I know that you're doing something that most all of us are like, we're too, I'm a little too lazy to do it, but you're actually making sheets of wax. You're actually kind of doing it the old way of putting them in wooden frames and embossing the wires into them and all that electrically and all. Do you think that fresh wax helps, as far as that, the chemical build up in your apiary? You're seems like to me must be calling out the frames quite often, every year.
Yeah, I've been on a pretty big campaign of culling frames now for probably the last 5 seasons. But up until that point, to be honest with you, I really didn't. It really wasn't on my radar until my apiary. With this rebuilding of my apiary, I become more serious about culling combs. And to answer the question around homemade foundation and stuff, I'd like to tell myself that it does something, but I'd be lying to you, I think, if I did. I think that it's just some satisfaction for me personally to use my own cappings and to reincorporate that into the apiary, and then just to watch the bees every year draw the comb out off of it. It's just really it's a personal satisfaction that I get, and I can't help to think. I mean, I know where the wax is coming from. It's coming from my own cappings wax that I harvested in last season's crop of honey. So it's for the most part pretty clean wax. So you'd like to think. But I trust me. If I didn't find some sort of enjoyment out of it, it's really a big time sink, because I could just use plastic and it would save me about a month of work and of labor, to be doing something else.
So it's more just for your own pleasure, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I can't. I have no way to measure if there's any positive correlation to using, homemade foundations. I'd like to think that there is, but that's too much of a. I'd be stepping too far out to say that boldly.
Got her. I end up making a lot of my stuff up here just simply because of where I'm located.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So. I wish I was not so far away from most of these manufacturing facilities, but it gives me a good reason to go on a road trip every now and then.
Yeah, well, I can't help to think that there's some. My dad would always say, what builds character.
Well, these guys say, you know what? Anybody that you could drive to is your neighbor. So everybody on this screen is my neighbor.
That's right.
He likes a lot of 18-hour drives. That's his favorite time, I think. If it's less than 18 hours, he won't drive. It's not worth it.
Well, I've been known to go on a few 18-hour drives. So, but over your extraction line. So you've got the vertical Cowan wax extractor or wax separator.
Yeah, I bought the 28 frame system a couple of seasons ago. And I bought it. I asked the boys, at Cowan, what's the best kind of machine for the kind of the production scale and size that I'm running. And I bought the 28 frame primarily due to my footprint in my honey house. I like as most people, I built my honey house in 2016 with my budget at the time and my ability to kind of build. So I wish I built my facility at about 4 times the size that I have today, which is like kind of the motto of most people when it comes to space. But so the 28 frame, it works perfectly for like the 300 colony. Again, it's really, when it comes to like, as you know, James, you probably understand where I'm coming from. Maybe most of you guys probably do as well. When it comes to a commercial extracting line, you're looking at number of boxes or the volume of honey extracted in a time, right? It's a lot at a time. And for me, and overall the crop of honey, right? You have a crop of honey that's being produced, and how much time you have to get it off the bees and into the container or whatever that you're putting it in.
Yeah, I'm probably not a good reference for that.
So
I'm looking forward to this Cowan line. Let's put it that way, Charlie.
Yeah. Because James is the greatest extractor when you use literally now a 12 frame extractor to extract, what was it, 16,000 pounds last year?
Just over 15,000 pounds of honey last year.
15,000 pounds.
So yeah, you're doing that. You might as well make your own foundation, because that's the same type of.
Oh no, There's a reason I drove to Mississippi.
Okay.
Yeah, I won't do that again.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, if you bought a 60 frame Cowan, you'll
Yeah.
be able to go on like a little vacation, all the much sooner because of the amount. You'll get the work done faster.
well, I did a calculation. So what would take us a weekend to do, I will do in about 25 minutes now.
Yep.
So, but
Yeah, no, that's
so that wax extractor, do you batch the wax over to it, or do you constantly feed it?
yes, it's batched. Yep. So the auger beneath the uncapper is, once that gets full, we just pump. We turn the auger on and fill the spinner. And it's primarily because the spinner, in order for the cappings to really, be cycled or pulled, for the honey to be pulled out of the cappings, you need to kind of stop the inflow of wet cappings for that honey to be spun out.
Up to the outside.
You got it. So if you had a continuous, exposure of wet cappings, you would never get anywhere with dry cappings. And it works nice. I mean, if you keep the temperature of the honey, if the moisture content is, within the normal range, 15 to 16, 17, or heck, if you're running it a little wet. But if the temperature is in that, for me, degrees Fahrenheit, 70, 80, maybe even 90 degrees, the spinner that I've been using, which is the latest model, the horizontal one, or the vertical one, excuse me.
Yeah.
We can run that. So for about the same time it takes for the auger to fill, the spinner is ready to empty. So it does work really nice to work with. There's really no kind of hiccups or any sort of backup that occurs in that part of the process.
Got her. Well, we got the bad news today that even with our auger powder coated with food grade powder coating, that the CFIA won't accept it. So I'm back to the well, I'm gonna have to dig out my TIG welder stuff again. So it'll be back to the fabrication shop. So
what did you have? Was it the galvanized or something? Your auger was galvanized?
I think it's not galvanized. I think it was actually satin coat.
Oh, okay.
So, but I'm going to change the design on it a little bit. Imagine that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to change it around a little bit to make it, let's say, a little bit better to expand in the future.
Yep.
So if you had a a stainless steel auger,
Yep.
would that satisfy your health department?
The hopper and the auger has to be stainless steel. So that's the only piece of equipment that we picked up down there. Now it was kind of a bonus because it we knew that there was a hopper there and an auger there, but that's not what we went for. I mean, we went for the extraction line. So the 60 frame Cowan, the spinner, the dual outfeed tables, that's really what we went down for. So the fact that the hopper was there was great. We thought it was going to be an easy fix, but really what it is it's a blueprint for me.
Mm-hmm. How is yours, Troy? Is it stainless too? Stainless?
Yeah, everything Cowan makes is top quality. They're using really good high quality stainless steel. The gauge, the gauge of the steel, if you bought a Cowan and it's heck, I mean, even if it's some of their older stuff, it's just built to last, and everything's stainless. I think some of the newer stuff that Cowan, because of the cost, the way the economies are working in the world nowadays, with the manufacturing process, the motors, all the components are becoming more expensive. So for somebody to buy a new 60 frame or whatever, any line that they're currently making is, if you just look at the price of what they were 2 years ago, or even, right before the pandemic, right, when things started to kind of get out of control price wise, the same machine I bought, or I'm just, what was $30,000, now today is probably pushing $50,000 or something, and the 60 frame system that was $50,000 to $60,000 is almost pushing $100,000 or $80,000. So what Cowan, I think, has been doing is using there you go, yeah, you got the whole thing. So they've been using components that are not going to come in contact with the honey and using powder coated steel. So I think obviously anything that's going to contact food, honey being that food product, has to be stainless to meet most requirements and for board, whatever government oversight agency that's keeping an eye on the integrity of cleanliness and food production.
Yeah,
has to be stainless steel.
They were saying up here there's a difference between something that is designed to handle the honey, i.e., like that auger,
Yep.
versus something that would be momentary contact, I think is what the
Yep.
term. So, but I mean, everything else on that line that I got is stainless steel. So, easy to rectify.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. They Cowan has. I think they're calling. They have two lines now, and who knows? It could change. But they have an economy line, and then they have their traditional line. Like the one that I bought is just everything on it is stainless. It's when it showed up, I was like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of stainless steel. But yeah, no, if you buy their economy line, it'll be food grade. It'll probably meet the requirements in Canada, I could assume. But
yeah, this is a commercial line. Like I said,
yeah.
The hopper is the only thing that isn't. Everything else on it is a commercial line. And in fact, I think it's identical to Ian's. I think.
Okay. Yep.
So,
yeah, Ian, if he's in the chat, but you can see like all the blue, all the stuff that they paint, that the blue. If I'm not mistaken, that's just powder coated. That's just iron, or angle iron or whatever.
Yeah, well,
powder coated.
Never touches the honey, anyways, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And if it does, you're going to wash it down the drain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Overall, my experience with running Cowan's equipment is it's been a game changer. And I don't know. I mean, you have all these other, manufacturers. You have Lyson and all the European companies that are, offering something similar. But I've seen them at the shows. If you go to the vendor halls, you can kind of see them, and you can tell, just by again putting your hands on something, and you can feel the thickness of the components, the quality of how certain things are, like a latch, or how smooth it moves, the weight of the lid, and how easy it opens. All that stuff, at least from my exposure to what I've been running with Cowan, has been top notch.
Excellent. Well, like I said, I'm looking forward to it this year. So, I didn't get rid of my 12 frame though, Charlie. I'm hanging on to my 12 frame.
Well, at least it wasn't a hand crank, that's for sure.
I got to draw the line somewhere.
So anyway,
I'm going to stoke my fireplace. Hang on one second.
I thought he said it was nice up there.
For Canada, that is nice. It's nice and blue, but it's still cool.
And
around this fire pit.
So we had a couple questions during the presentation that I starred. Yep. Lambrook Farm said, Troy, when is your first honey catch?
I hold everything.
Sorry, queen catch, not honey.
Yeah, the first queen catch is well, let me tell you, I got the schedule for this year right here. This year's first queen catch will be on June 14th.
June 14th.
Yep.
I think he said he was 40 miles east of you, I think is what he said.
Okay. Yep.
And then Morris Homestead said, how do I address swarming while still trying to get a good honey crop?
How to address swarming while getting a good crop of honey. Again, my basic kind of experience with trying to produce honey with a big population of bees is to be ahead of that population. I think the biggest thing that a lot of beekeepers struggle with early on with understanding bee management is that you're managing population. You're not managing kind of these individual. You have to look at the colony, right, as this whole superorganism. So you're managing that population to a specific ends and means. And if you want to produce honey, you have to stay ahead of that product. You have to stay ahead of that population kind of growth, right? So you have to give them room for them to produce honey. You just can't keep them confined to a space when nectar is coming in, because we all know what happens when they're confined to tight spaces. As the population is exponentially exploding, the impulse to swarm happens. And obviously when that happens, it's a genetic thing as well, right? Some bees can be brought back from that brink of swarming because of their genetic disposition to swarm, and again, the nature's every year, I think nature as well, the environment plays on the bees' intensity of swarming. So again, you have those two factors: the environmental impact plus the genetic impact. So again, I play with a lot of Russian genetics, hybridized Russian genetics, and we all know that Russians are predominantly really easy to, they don't need a lot to push them out the entrance to swarm. So I'm always a big kind of trying to get out early as I can to stay ahead of my honey production colonies by giving them a drawn comb, preferably, right? That's the secret, drawn comb above the brood nest for them to put those nectar stores in.
Well, I started doing a lot of that this year. Is when I added the second box on, I started pulling the brood up, right? The cap brood, I pull it up and I just put drawn comb back in the brood box. And that way the brood is hatching above the excluder and she's got a fresh section to lay in right there all the time.
Well, that's a whole nother thing, right? If you're trying to produce a crop with a queen excluder, and I know most people, for a long time in my career, I never used queen excluders because of the bees' stubbornness to want to work up in the excluders. And I always had as a trade-off, right? You don't use excluders. Typically, that means you have brood, a little bit of brood in the bottom stack of your honey supers, and you have to somehow be able to work around that. I started to use supers probably in my operation religiously, in a sense, probably a decade ago. And I'm right there with you. Yeah, you have to, some colonies, and again, I think it's genetic, I think it's environmental, but some colonies just don't want to get up through that excluder. What I've done sometimes is take deeps of old brood combs, and put that on first in the year. If I have, these double deep colonies that are full of bees and it's right before the main flow, maybe a couple weeks before the main flow, is to put those deeps on of dark comb. Those bees just are like, it's like a magnet. They're drawn to that dark comb a lot more than the light, combs that are just exposed to honey and no brood. So my point is, if I can put those supers on and make a split, put that deep on of drawn comb, put a few frames of brood up there, and then pull it off. So those kind of like you said, Bob, you train those worker bees, you train those bees to work through the excluder. And then when the flow really kicks in, you can pull the split off and put the supers on, and you don't have to worry about them, being stubborn and working through the excluders.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Troy. That if you just put an excluder on, and you have to give them that reason, because they'll see that as a ceiling. But if they've got something up there that they want, like brood, then it's not a ceiling at all. They just right through there. I put mine on, and I always pull at least one bait frame up above that, and there'd be bees up through that excluder before I get the lid put back on the thing. So
Yeah, Brad, do you use to bait the super, Brad? Do you use brood, or is it honey or nectar, or what? I'm just curious.
I use that as part of the way that I rotate my comb.
Okay.
So what I'll do is in my brood chamber, I'll pull anything that I don't, anything that's older, I'll pull that up above that excluder. So then it ends up in the honey house. And when I'm still using a good old Kelly radial. And so I handle every one of those things. If I pick that, when I'm done my cycle and I'm unloading that extractor, when I pull that old frame that I don't want anymore, it goes over here in a pile instead of back in the supers. So that's just my little way of rotating comb, and it gets the bait frame method done too get the bees up through that excluder.
Yeah, good idea.
So are you doing single brood chamber management with your honey supers or not, or just double brood?
For me?
Yeah, Troy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm using double, primarily because of there's with queen breeding, with raising queens and harvesting honey all at the same time. As you guys know, with single brood management, when you pull the crop of honey off, you don't have a lot of time sometimes to get the feed on. And for me, I don't have that luxury because I'm still kind of wrapping up honey, with queen production and getting queens all kind of orchestrated and nukes and everything. So I found that for me, the trade-off for time is to be able to let them have 2 deeps where they can have a little bit of a stash of honey. You can harvest the crop and they're not starving to death, and I can continue to be relieved of the task of feeding right as I pull the honey off.
So you'll put them through the winter with your honey, like with
I'll put them through the So ideally, I mean, I obviously over the time I've been doing this, I always have to traditionally feed at least a couple of gallons of syrup to get them to the weight. Some years, like last year, I hardly had to feed any syrup. They were able to secure all their feed naturally with honey, but that's an anomaly. Typically, if I was to say, if you look at beekeeping over averages of 5 to 10 years, I usually feed 2 gallons, 3 gallons of syrup to every double deep that I want to overwinter.
What's the nectar source for that honey that they're wintering on?
Primarily goldenrod, and then we have a lot of Japanese knotweed. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but that grows predominantly as an invasive here in the river valley where I'm at.
Is that a
And
light honey?
It's very dark, actually. It's almost
really?
it's like motor oil. It's like
Okay.
a buckwheat. Yeah. If you hold it up
That's
to the light,
surprising.
it's actually like an amber, a red ambered color if you hold it to the light.
It's
Like
surprisingly winter well on such a dark honey.
Yeah, well, it's phenomenal honey because it crystallizes very slowly, and I think the ratio of like fructose to it's higher, definitely. I think fructose content because of the fact that it doesn't set up like goldenrod, but it's really for a dark honey. It's the ash content is very low. I think it's a very.
Okay.
I mean, this is my
Yeah.
speculation. Right? It's pretty clean honey.
and
It's
your
got
bees
to
get a
be.
chance to get out and fly in the wintertime a little bit, correct?
Yeah, we typically will get 1 or 2 cleansing flights in a normal winter. Like this winter was again an anomaly because it was pretty mild. I mean, heck, we didn't really get any snow until I went to the Bee Expo there in Kentucky, and when we left, we had bare ground. It was cold, right? But we didn't have much snow. And then when we came back from the expo, like what was it? The first part of January, then we got the snow. We started to get the accumulation of big snow. But it was up until then the bees had it was like we wintered them in a shed, right? They had in degrees Fahrenheit they were averaging 28 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit pretty consistently. During daytime highs, it'd get to the single digits or teens at night, but it never was really that really stressful point of being so cold for so long. And they could get out and fly. I'd say at least once a month, maybe once every 2 months during the coldest part of the winter.
My nectar source here is a lot of clovers and whatnot, and I've not been brave enough to really depend on it solely for a winter feed, but information in the area says that it should make a pretty good winter feed. So
Yeah.
I'm really tempted to try that, see how it goes.
And see what I've done is I take a little bit of a different approach. I pull all of the honey, even what's down in the brood chamber. If as long as it doesn't have brood or eggs or larvae in it, I pull it, and then I give them all the sugar water, and I'll plug them out with that. Now, in order to do that, I got to be right on it. So when they probably do get some mixed back in there simply just because of the time of the year where I try to start plugging them out. But I will try to take everything I can from them. And, I just find wintering indoors, it's just a little bit easier on them. I don't seem to have the stomach problems, most of the time with the sugar water versus the honey.
Typically, that's always what I've done too. Just because the people that mentor me, that's what they do, and again, I don't have the canola problem here. So, sorry, I shouldn't say problem. I don't have the challenges with canola honey because you don't want that in the brood chamber.
Yeah.
So it's either going to be clover honey or it's going to be sugar syrup in the brood chamber, and so that's kind of exactly what I do. You just plug them right out on syrup, but it takes a lot of syrup. You're talking, Troy, about how much syrup you're putting in those hives. Well, I'm putting 5 gallons into a single.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's the trade-off, right? When you're running singles and you pull the crop and they're without any feed.
That's
yeah,
right.
You're having to get to work to make sure that you have the feed.
Yeah, that's
Well-
quite a dance. And you talked at one point about, your busy times and harvest and whatnot. And boy, that is a defining time for me. Pull the honey, get it in the honey house. And now everybody needs to be fed and treated and all of the fall
Yep.
work done. And the honey is sitting in the honey house needing to be extracted.
Yeah.
And a 33 frame Kelly don't extract honey all that fast. So
Yeah.
that fills up September really fast.
Do you have beetles, small hive beetles, Brad?
Thankfully not.
Thank goodness.
Thankfully not.
I do. Thank you very much,
What
He's
about
the
you,
beetle
Troy?
king.
Percy, for that one.
Yeah.
What about you, Troy? Up in the north, is it because if you don't have beetles, is it because of the frost line? I mean,
Yeah, we get beetles from the migratory guys coming up, and all the packages and nukes that are brought in. So we get a little bit of. I mean, beetles for me are you pull a cover on an occasional colony and you have maybe 3 or 4 scurrying about, but there's never this huge exodus of beetles scurrying across the top bars, and they're short lived, right? If we stop bringing in the packages and the nukes every year, the beetles I think would go away. Just to answer your question, Todd, yeah, it has a lot to do with the fact that that the temperatures are just not all that great for them to survive through the winter. But the funny thing is, right, I do see beetles coming through in the spring, right? They do overwinter in the cluster, and I sometimes wondered, do those female beetles lose their ability? Do they lose, kind of their fertility? I don't know. I sometimes wonder how they can regenerate themselves. But anyway, living in this part of the world, where there's winter, seems to the beetle problem is definitely mitigated by having that winter for sure.
That's good to hear because we're going to see them sooner or later.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear that they probably
You'll never
won't
see
become
them.
much of an issue.
The
Well,
beetle
I'm
thing-
sure we'll
you
see
never,
them.
never see
Come to
it.
my house.
I'm sure we'll see them, but if they're going to become a huge problem, I kind of don't think so. But I'd really like to see some research and science on that from trusted sources. There's so many opinions going around about that.
yeah, soil, humidity,
Yeah,
lack of cold. Yeah, it's
climate, Troy, is
similar.
probably about what we experience here, except perhaps that we don't usually get those periodic warm temperatures where the bees
Yeah.
could fly midwinter. Occasionally, though, more Januaries than not, we'll get a January thaw.
Yep.
But other than that, it's pretty much 4, 5, 6 months of indoors for the
Yeah.
bees.
If I lived where you guys, where the winter, if I lived just maybe like again, Montreal is about a 3-hour drive from me, and if I lived just again, if I drove 3 hours north and I was exposed to just a little bit more harsh conditions for the bees, where again, like you said, they couldn't cleanse like they would here. I'd be rethinking my whole wintering scheme pretty hard towards maybe the inside, wintering them in the shed. There are a couple of beekeepers here, even on a small kind of sideline scale, that winter their bees, in their inside, with humidity, or not humidity, but air control. They control the airflow and stuff. And it's amazing. I have a friend of mine who recently invested in this small little space where he can take 80 singles, and put them in for the winter. And his survival rate went from I think like 50%, so or something, pretty like 40 or 50%, to 20%, or I should say mortality rate. Excuse me, his mortality went from 50%, 40% to 20%. So it's helped him tremendously to just kind of get ahead by wintering them, in a controlled environment.
Our seasons here are so well defined, and they're reasonably predictable, because the extremes are such, right, from summer to winter, fall and spring, and it's definitely a different game, but it's not as harsh and difficult as it might seem. Actually, and I did this research when I was trying to figure out a few years back, am I going to winter indoors? Am I going to winter outdoors? And so I looked at the statistical history on the mortality, and the difference in mortality for the Manitoba beekeepers who responded to the poll and all that kind of stuff, right, was 1%.
Wow.
That was the difference. So I deducted that wintering indoors, wintering outdoors really was a matter of what works for the beekeeper. And for me as a beekeeper, you're talking about, you one guy do all the work. Well, I'm the guy. And so, I got everything's palletized, got my little tractor. I can move things in a building and stack them up way faster and easier than I could ever wrap anything.
Oh,
And
goodness. Yeah.
that's kind of what made my decision for me. And I had a really good mentor for indoor wintering, so that helped.
Never heard of the guy.
Yeah, he's a little hobbyist down here. Seems to know what he's doing though, so
Yeah.
give him that.
Yeah. Now, Troy, he mentioned that he, is getting mechanized. Well, talking with him on the phone, I found out he's got that B3 just like James has got, and just what I bought and everything. So, are you pulling your, putting escapes on with that thing? I'm sure.
I bought it just last winter, so I'm kind of brand new to using it. But I will say, in my time of using it, just in the last like month and a half in my yards, I'm amazed at what I've been able to do with it. I was thinking, okay, I'm making this $1,600 investment on this machine that I'll use maybe I was thinking just primarily to help save my back for using escapes, putting in escapes and taking escapes off. And I was thinking, I don't even know how efficient it's going to be to take full supers of honey and put them on my truck, kind of that. Because I again, most of my bee yards are pretty, I select locations that are flat, but there's some, again, the lay of the terrain here, there's a lot of hills. So some of it is, it's not ideal for the hive lifter with a lot of weight on it. But my point being, though, in the short time I've been using it this year, it's amazing at how I just don't need to use my back anymore. And it's very efficient. Once you get the knack for, getting the device to kind of grab where the hand holds and, getting just a little, it's like when you first start using it, you kind of have to realize you have to use the handles, right? To kind of lift up, to kind of release the what are the little levers, that go in,
or whatever. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a little bit of kind of a familiarity that's needed with getting used to using it, but it's definitely a game changer, and it's a lot of fun, being able to just take three deeps of honey and lift that right up and easily just back it off or move it to the truck or off the truck.
He says it'll lift. Yeah, he says it'll lift 4 deeps, and it does.
Yeah,
it'll lift 4 deeps, plus the 2 brood chambers, plus a pallet. But I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
James kind of bent his pallet forks, I guess you was.
Oh, yeah.
But that was this guy's fault. That wasn't the fault of the lifter.
Okay.
I mean, you try to take a shortcut, right? And it's getting late, or it's starting to rain or snow, or who knows, and you pushed a little bit further and you pushed a little bit further, and I pushed it a little bit too far. But I replaced that piece, and it's good to go again. So in fact, and where it attaches to the front with my forks, Alan had mentioned the other day, I think we're going to make an aluminum plate to go there, and I think that's going to solve all of my problems. It should lift it all then.
Oh, okay. Yep.
No,
that's something I learned with mine pretty early when I started using it, was it'll lift more weight than I want to handle on it. Right. Mm-hmm. It'll lift anything I hook onto it. It'll lift it. I don't want to try and maneuver that thing with everything that it'll lift. Yeah. So I've got to keep my wits about me and say, no, we'll take 3 this time.
And now Brad's got the B. What is it? One of the original B1s?
They might call it a B1. Yeah, it's original. It's more like a hand truck than a little forklift. Like
okay, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and for me it works great. I'd have to rearrange my apiary if I wanted to use a B3. So for me, it works really well. It's a little more compact fore and aft, so I can maneuver a little bit easier. Yeah,
I got the Bob 200. 2 hands 100 times.
And
I tell you, I went out there last Sunday, I guess it was. I did that video, but I, like you were saying, that the learning a new piece of machinery, the mechanics of it, and how you manipulate it to be an extension of yourself. And I find that the hydraulic cylinder is fine. You're just raising up your, I'll call it the set of, the front end
fingers.
loader part of it,
Oh,
the fingers.
Yep.
And once you kind of get it to the right height, it's more of you with the handles lifting it up and down to hook into. And then once you break the seal, let's say on honey supers or whatever, you just kind of push down and use it as a teeter-totter lever action. And then you can and then you do the same motion about when you're putting them back on, you just kind of put that back edge of that super on top of that, where the queen excluder is, and just lean it in, and you can pretty much get it almost dead on as far as not having to, to line it up and all that stuff. And like Troy says, there's no effort on your back or anything.
No.
It's amazing, I think.
I need a little bit bigger unit next year.
Yeah, you need one of them. You got to get ones that fits on the truck.
I'm going to get one to put on the truck. Yep.
Easy lifter.
I don't know if you guys, if you see like a lot of European beekeepers, the commercial, because there's a lot of commercial beekeepers in Ukraine, parts of Eastern Europe that are running operations similar to what I do, or even like the Greg Rogers, 300 to 600, maybe 500 colonies. So small kind of commercial, non-migratory. I mean, some of them might be migratory, but they have those little Isuzu flatbeds, where the sides fold down or whatever. But it's amazing to see like the infrastructure they've built up around not palletizing their operations, where they use the kind of like what would be the easy lift or the hive lifter for us, right? They have these things all over the place that especially I know in parts of Russia where it's like a common tool for the commercial beekeeper to use little lifts like this. And when I found out through Nathan Coleman, if you guys are familiar with who he is, he was like, I bought this lift, and it's been kind of a game changer. And I talked to Greg Rogers, as I mentioned in the talk. He's in Asheville, North Carolina, or somewhere in that area in the States. And he was talking about, on his scale and his size with, he doesn't own a forklift. He has a boom, like the old Kelly. You guys see the old Kelly booms? Yeah. So he has one of those. Plus he has a lift gate on his truck, so he has no need to invest in the flat or into a forklift. And that I was kind of at that place here a few years ago. It's like I desperately need to either palletize or figure out how to work, without investing in the forklift. And this machine, the hive lifter has definitely made it easy where I don't have to. I got a lift gate on my truck as well, so the lift gate. And this machine has definitely. I don't need to buy a forklift with the size of the apiary that I run now.
Well, Boris makes a set of forks for that B3 loader.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yes, yep.
I run pallets, so I run actually this guy's pallets.
Yep.
So
okay, yeah.
Well, he didn't take mine; he made his own.
Are they?
No, actually, I think I got 15 of yours.
Oh, you got 15 that I made.
Troy, you got to understand it, Brad. He, as I say, Brad's invented that pallet like Ian, uses.
Yes. So Brad, you're the brains behind that.
Oh no, I when I started, I had to decide how to manage, and I had this little tractor, and which I bought before I decided to be a beekeeper, so it was just fate. And forks on the tractor and whatnot. So I started, but it only, it's a little tractor. It only lift 400 or 500 pounds. So two-way pallet really spoke to me, and I found a picture of this two-way pallet online, and I just copied it. But I did make some adjustments to it, to just some things that I thought might make it a little bit better. And it was Ian's pallet that I was looking at online.
Oh, okay.
And so I just kind of changed the location of the runners and the way the lids are made and whatnot, so they actually nest together when you stack them. So actually he's kind of likes that design now too, so that's what I'm spending my time building pallets for Ian. Just got to come full circle.
And then James borrowed the design, and he's been making his own pallets the last couple of years.
Well, that's actually how I met Brad, because I was at that same state where I was tired of all the single hives, and I searched and searched and searched and searched, and then I found one of Brad's videos, so I reached out to him, and yeah, the rest is history.
I see that design on videos from time to time. I see it around the internet, and it really makes me smile to see people using that design. And I put that Troy on SketchUp Warehouse, so anybody
Okay.
can take the models for free if they
Wow.
so
Yeah.
choose to build that. Yeah, and it's a, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's kind of the palette and the migratory cover kind of
Yep.
go together as a set,
Yep.
so they stack. And I met a young man. We're having coffee. Met a young man. He was showing his operation, his pictures on his phone, and I looked at his palettes and his covers, and I said, "Does that palette interlock with that cover?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah." I said, "That's genius." He said, "Yeah, I found that on the internet somewhere." He said, "I just thought I'd build it."
Yeah.
I said, "That's total genius, that design," and he didn't get it.
So I've incorporated that palette now, Brad, into my my mini mating nukes.
Yeah.
So I made a little cross on the bottom, and now each one of those pallets holds eight mini mating nukes. I pick it all up, and away it goes. So I just
Perfect.
you
Perfect. I build everything I build has that cover. I have a 4-frame nuke. That cover is this wide. It's exactly like the 10-frame, like 6-frame, exactly like 10-frame.
Yep.
So you fill a pallet with those, everything stacks perfectly. Nothing's out of place.
Wow.
Away you go.
Well, maybe that'll be what happens on my end here in the next couple of years. You'll see some things change. It'll
I
grow
was
higher.
looking at your equipment and thinking, boy, telescoping covers, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. And the longer I've been doing this, I look around, and that's one of the things that I have to it's a kind of a nagging thing that I need to start to address, because the telescoping covers that I have adopted just what I've learned from my mentors, and they all use telescoping covers, and I'm starting to feel like it's limiting my ability to kind of, again, just economize and mechanize things for ease of work and effort. So yeah, no, the whole idea of palletizing, and actually just the basic, maybe even starting with using migratory covers or covers that can be easily, you can stack things up on top of, and less wood in general, less anyways.
I like
More,
the less material. I like it's cheaper, and they don't generally have the metal on top, so it's
yeah.
cheaper and easier to build, and they're lighter. You're saying that I'm a lot older than you, and when you lift that cover 100 times in a day, right?
Oh yeah.
If it weighs 2 pounds less, that's a lot of weight that you haven't lifted that day, and just little things like that. Upper entrances in wintering or anything, do you use those?
Yeah, so I've been using I used to, when I started, I used to just drill the holes in the upper supers, and that became kind of you have these holes punched in your boxes all over the place, and some years, they're not even in the right places. So I've just been using, actually, and it's funny because I've been using the inner covers, right, where the telescoping covers, they have inner covers,
Right.
and all the inner covers have a notch, like the traditional kind of, most inner covers now have that notch, and I use that as an upper entrance.
That's a bit of a challenge with a migratory because it doesn't lend itself well to that, the inner cover idea, and there's no hole or notch. I know a buddy who made a bunch, and he just drilled a hole in it for an upper for winter, and he put that little plastic disc
Oh
on it,
yeah. Yep.
so that because you put a bee escape, you gotta make sure you
Yeah.
cover that thing up. I learned that the hard way the first year. It's like, boy, there's a lot of activity on that hive.
Yes. Yep.
So I seen where you were using 1.5 styrofoam insulation up on top of your hive for your winter configuration. Do you find that to do help greatly, in your situation up there?
Yeah, I find that it does wick moisture. At least it keeps the condensation that the cluster is generating from not immediately condensing on that inner cover or whatever the ceiling is, and just
Keep it on the sides.
Yeah, exactly. You'll have it on the sides. With the upper entrance, it is fun to, you go out in the really cold times of the winter, like where it's, below zero in Fahrenheit. and you just have to see, you just see that frozen condensation right there, and you know that, you know, it's, those bees are alive, and you can actually, I've cracked the covers on them, and they're just bone dry, right? There's no moisture that's frozen around the exterior of the colonies on the interior of the boxes. Yeah, so the blue board does help at least slow that immediate condensation. So it'll, that warm air will hit that cover, and then I feel like it kind of just disperses like a cloud, you know, or like a mushroom. It'll push out, and you'll see condensation in the early parts of the spring when they really start to brood up and the temperatures rise, right? It'll condensate on the interior of the boxes a little bit. But sometimes I wonder at that point, you know, I don't think that insulation is going to mitigate that, especially because you have such extreme temperature variations with brood rearing, right? To 90, what is it, 95, 94 degrees Fahrenheit that the brood nest has to be maintained. And you can have the external temperatures with such contrast. Where in the winter, when they're broodless, they're more stable temperatures, less condensation sometimes. It's the colonies that are for a rabbit trail in the conversation. It's the colonies in the winter that are really raising, you know, a lot of moisture problems, are the ones that are just destined to die, in my opinion, because they're trying to raise brood to fix a problem. You know, there's a health issue, there's a population issue, and the only way that the bees, I feel, know how to address that is by raising brood at a time of year where they shouldn't. It's kind of like the last attempt. So then you have those moisture problems where they're in a healthy colony, they wouldn't even be attempting to raise brood to begin with.
And Doug there, he's all up in Saskatchewan. He was staying where he uses a shim, you know, for shim, and then a migratory cover on top of that.
Do your bees, Troy, get buried in the snow in the winter?
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the trade-offs with having the upper entrances and stuff. I think, again, given the climate, you know, if most of the guys, I mean, you guys have bees in winter or them outside, you know, they're all palletized and heavily, you know, they pack them accordingly, and they're buried in the snow all winter long. So yes, they typically are buried, you know. The double deep colonies on average will get like a third, you know, the top third of the cover, and the top, you know, third of the top deep or whatever are exposed, so that upper entrance is nice when those cleansing flights are available. They're not having to kind of be stuck inside. They can get out that upper entrance.
So you've had bad results then if the hive is completely covered in the snow?
No, it's fine. I try to keep track of that. And I find if they're healthy, right? If the colonies are healthy, there's nothing that's going to stop them, really. The only thing that's going to stop them is if they run out of honey, you know, if they starve out.
Because we find that if the bees, if the hives are buried in the snow, that's the best colonies. They're the ones that winter the best.
Exactly, and yes, yep.
Because they're out of the elements. They're out of the no solar gain to make that temperature go up and down. There's no wind chill. The ground kind of moderates that temp, and they actually melt a little igloo.
Yes,
in there.
The
There's
snow
no
actually
snow like
provides
4 to 6 inches around that hive. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
actually desirable. Put your bees by a tree line so they get covered up.
So as I say, do I ever use styrofoam hives? I did use. I bought some of those polystyrene hives early on. You know, when I was just building the colonies. When I was still kind of not even considering this as a vocation. And then I had Michael Palmer once. He said, "You know, I don't like to keep my bees in a beer cooler."
Yeah,
you
he
know,
doesn't like those.
yeah. So it kind of, anyways, you know, so coming from him, I was like, yeah, you know. But anyways, the downside to the polystyrene is that they're just so fragile. You know, they won't hold up, you know, with constant abuse of your hive tool trying to get in and, you know, split the supers or whatever, or just manhandling them, you know, from one place to the next. If you just, I think with if you're doing this on a hobby, I think they will last longer. But on a commercial setting where you're moving that equipment, you know, several places throughout every season, they're not gonna hold up very well.
Doug's been trying some boxes that are made in Alberta. They're one piece. They're tough to ship because they don't flat pack, but it's a one piece box, so they don't come apart. I don't know if what you were using, was that the Paradise box? Comes in, you know, 4 pieces and kind of has a bit of a notch. And
Yep.
Yeah.
mortise and tenon and stuff. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
got some of those, and you're right. It's they're not as tough, but I think those one-piece ones definitely would be a
Well,
step forward.
and the one-piece ones that Doug is using now, they have actually got a step up from that where they line it with I don't know if it's a plastic or a different styrofoam, but it's almost hard. I mean, I would think they would take a lot of weight. I'd be hard pressed to say that you'd be able to destroy one of those unless you really tried.
I found the bees do well in them. I don't like them. I have a love-hate with them. I love how the bees do in them, and I hate everything else about them. But
Yeah.
I can't get rid of them because the bees do so well in them. But
Yeah.
I've just got some. These are my little I was talking about my 4-framer with the migratory lid. Well, that's it right there. But I think some of those polys are over here, 6-frame Paradise polystyrenes, and I can't stop using them. The bees like them. I wish I could. I hate everything else about them.
Yes.
Stupid poly.
I understand that struggle.
Yeah. Well, I'm the kind of, like I said, with the lid, the lid is exactly the same as every other lid. That's me. And that's just how I go. It's like everything has, look here behind me. Do you see much variety here? Everything is the same. So when you start introducing things like polystyrene hives, it's kind of, oh my goodness, what am I going to do?
Yeah, and it makes sense too, right? If you start managing any certain number, at some point you have to start to standardize for the, like you said, the sake of all the things that come about with managing more numbers, with
Yeah.
volume.
Yeah. I have 80 lids that'll fit this box, and chances are there's one sitting near me when I need it. Right.
Yep.
I'm managing that poly hive, and it's kind of, where's the friggin' lid? Right.
Yep.
You got to go and
And
find
it's
that
way over there.
because they blow around, and now you need
Yeah.
bricks. Well, I don't need bricks for these. That's something you'd notice, Troy, with a migratory. They don't blow off nearly as easy as a telescoping.
That's one thing I've really been intrigued at, actually, is to see how a lot of people with migratory covers are, and obviously being what they are, they're pretty heavy. But you're right, we get intense winds sometimes, and you come to a yard and they're all kind of, some of them aren't really blown off, but they're just cockeyed,
Yeah.
on the colonies from the wind.
I think the wind gets up under that
Yes.
edge, and the migratory really doesn't have much of a lip to get under there. I never use a brick, and the only time I ever lost a lid, it was actually a bear carried it away. So certainly wasn't the wind.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've been really thinking hard about going forward to just make everything a little bit more efficient and a little bit more user friendly, is looking at what I have for as far as pallet. If I was to palletize, like in your case, like where you have the double pallets, is that what they're called?
Yeah. Well, I call it a two-way. Yeah.
Two-way pallets. Yeah, the two ways, and then looking at the covers for the operation. But
And I make 3 ways too for the 6-frame. So we'll have a two-way pallet, 2 10s, or we'll have 3 6s. And the pallet itself is identical dimensions, so that you can stack 2 ways and 3 ways in the shed or on the truck, and doesn't matter what it is, it'll stack together.
Yeah, it's really brilliant the way that that's the one when I watch guys like Ian or whatever, and obviously if that you're making those pallets for him, you know all about that. You're using them in house, but just the fact that everything fits, it just works together, and especially it's seamless, and it works so beautifully when you need to move. Because like right now is the time of year where I'm doing a lot of moving, right? I need to move colonies out of where they winter into where they're going to produce a crop of honey or wherever. So that's just a huge amount of labor. When you got telescoping covers, that's taking up space on the truck. It's added weight. So all about that. So that's the thing. I'm circling back around to just thinking like, okay, telescoping cover or migratory covers with some sort of a way. And if the hive lifter, like if you can use it to lift the two-way pallets, then that's maybe a game changer for me.
Now explain now, Brad, that the Canadian dimensions are like that 6-way pallet. It's a 6-frame nuke, but it's different dimensions than what ours
Well,
is.
for some reason, Canadian boxes are made of 7/8 thick
Ah,
material,
yes. I'm very
but not
familiar with
3/4.
7/8. Yep.
Yeah.
Because
So
I for a long time, and when I used to make, I mean, just up until a few years ago, I've made my equipment exclusively, in house, and I would mill it to 7/8. So
oh yeah,
yeah,
I like them. I could imagine going 3/4 because that little part above the frame rest, boy, that'd get thin.
yes,
They're just it seemed to be a little more robust, I think.
yep.
A little
And your
heavier, I
handholds,
suppose.
you can mill the handholds or dado, with the
Yeah.
handholds can be a little deeper as well. Yep.
You think another 1/8 wouldn't really make much difference, but boy, does it ever.
Yes, it does. And especially if you dip your equipment, Brad.
I have it wax dipped, yeah.
Okay, yeah, no,
Yeah.
I've had a friend do it, and he was doing it with steam, so he couldn't get the wax quite, too hot enough. But anyways, with steam, he was able to do a lot of. I've used his services to dip, but some of the 7/8 inch equipment gets so. For me, it's a it's so heavy because of the amount of wax that it's absorbed.
It does absorb a lot of wax.
Yes,
Yeah.
yep,
Yeah, there's a box manufacturer in Manitoba here, 2-hour drive from me. And whenever I build equipment, I'll just load it on the trailer and take it down there. And they'll dip it up for me.
yeah,
And then I build almost everything but boxes. I won't build boxes because I just go over there and buy them. The price of a box does not pay me anything to build a box, so I
yeah.
concentrate on building other stuff.
I buy the boxes, but I have to put them together because they're just so bulky to transfer.
Well, yeah, you got to ship them.
here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but it's
they-
18 hours. That's why.
18 hours.
I mean, yeah, but Brad makes one heck of a mean burger, so it's worth the 18-hour drive.
Yeah, that's right. Made a couple of New York strips on the new grill tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Ah,
there you
Turned out
go.
nice.
Nice.
Well,
Baked
you can have
potatoes
some
and the
more in
whole
about
9
18
yards.
hours.
That's right. Get in the truck.
So, Troy, are you leaning towards 2 ways versus 4 ways?
For mating
pallet.
nucleus, what's that?
Well, I mean, just pallets. If you palletize, are you going 2 way?
Yeah, I if I was to make that decision today, I definitely would do 2 ways. Because I again, if you went 4 ways, you'd need a forklift.
You need something substantial.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
or an easy.
It's not just
easy
twice
loader.
either, because you've got
Yeah.
that extra 2 or another 24 inches from your pin, and that's going to more than double the weight.
Yeah,
But like I said, I took Brad's pallet design and I put the mini mating nukes that he kind of put me onto there. That's what it's mating today. So there's 8 mating nukes that go on that pallet. That pallet, I can pick it up and it locks on with. It doesn't matter whether I got a three-way pallet there, or if it's a 2-way pallet, or this mini mating nuke pallet. They all lock together. They go on the trailer. The one strap locks them down, and it's all the same. And I can't say how much it helps me and how much time it cuts down to have everything interlocked together. Just everything. It doesn't matter what you've got. They just go together.
It kind of at the risk of pushing my own idea or something here. Troy, look on Ian's channel. He's got a video he made a while back called Adopting a New Pallet Design. He does a really good description in there of the things that he likes about the pallet and cover combination on his truck.
I think he did that was it last year he did that?
I don't know if it was last year. It might have been.
Or the year before? Last year or the year before?
It was about the first season he got a bunch of them in because he had a mixture on his truck, and he showed what were the challenges with the old design and where the new design kind of filled in the gaps. So a little bit of information.
The reason why I asked Troy that question is because for a while now I've been thinking about getting a hive lifter because my back sucks. And it was up until about maybe 2-3 weeks ago when Bob was up in Maryland at Charlie's place doing a video that I started noticing things about the hive lifter. And the biggest thing that I noticed was the fork, the thickness of the fork. I'm on 4-way pallets, but I'm also on U-clips. and that's not going to work. And even you know, I was talking to Charlie last night. A W clip probably wouldn't work. So I'm just throwing it out there for maybe anybody that's listening and thinking about getting a hive lifter. You have to consider that. So, luckily, what I could do if I really wanted to is I could take a chainsaw and make a modification of my 4-ways, and that's no big deal. I'm just cutting.
Well, let me ask you this, James. With Ian, I got to thinking about what Todd was talking about. He's got 2 hives just like yours tight together. So in order for him to pick that up with a hive lifter, he's got to come on the opposite, on the outer edge of that box. So it's the
long side.
The long side of the box.
That's exactly how I manage. And James, you just come at the side and pick the box up.
Because say with my lifter, I've got those arms all the way in because I'm coming in the narrow way of the box. Yep. So you guys are coming from the side of the end of the pallet, and that's where I can adjust that out in order to pick that box up.
20 1/8 in my case, long way of the box. Pick it up from the side.
James is going to show us. I think James is going to show us something there.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's something that you could think about, Todd, is the fact that if you went 2-way pallet, then the hive lifter or a type of hive lift would work for you.
And I really am thinking about firing up.
Todd, is it the pallet or is it the clearance beside the pallet?
Both.
Because if you got in beside your pallet, it doesn't matter. It's a 4-way. Beside your pallet, you can still lift that up from the side, right?
Behind you is kind of how I have my pallets placed. So I have no room, like how you have yours. I have no room. So I've got to do something if I want to save my back. So
one of the things is, optionally, like I was saying, with my system is I prefer the one that I have because it's more compact front to back, right? Because my pallet rows are 7 feet apart or something like that. I can manage in there, whereas with Charlie's lifter, the one that this guy is showing, James is showing, it's just a little longer front to back, so you just need to organize your apiary a little differently.
Yeah, I'm a little tighter right now from row to row too.
Yeah, that's nice. That's really nice.
But you see how they will fit, like your forks will fit right in there.
Yeah.
Right. And these all go on the U clips and everything there too.
So do you just put a temporary shim in the bottom under the where the
what I'm working on is I'm just going to make a crisscross shim, if you will. So you can kind of see I've started to figure it out there.
Right.
And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to have it so that it'll cross here and it'll cross here. And I'm going to put entrance reducers in here. And then that becomes a 8 frame or an 8 mini nuke all on the same pallet.
I did a little bit of that one time, and I kind of thought about that, and I wondered, you know what? I don't think I really want to modify my 2-way, so I actually made a bottom for whatever I was doing that sat on top of the 2-way, and I just screwed it down so that then when I changed my mind, which I did, I could just take it off again.
Yeah, I just didn't want to modify the 2-way pallet.
Yeah,
right.
That's what I'm saying.
It to stay all the same.
Yeah.
But you can see how the lifter, like I said, the lifter just goes right in there. Where's my camera? So one bar goes about here, the other bar goes about here, and away you go, Todd. So I think it would work for you.
Yeah, I'm really thinking about chopping those pallets in half.
Yeah, just like a skill saw would be better.
The long side, not the short side. Let's get. Yeah,
Milwaukee battery sawzall. That'll do the job for you.
There you go.
Oh, I just fire up the chainsaw and just go. I have 3 runners.
You'll rip your ground cover.
Well, no way. That's true. Yeah, I forgot about that. Crap. Well, I can James on the tractor. but then I'll be in trouble when they
Yeah,
separate.
flip them up with the forklift on the tractor and put some blocking underneath of it and
Yeah,
go to
yeah,
town.
yeah.
James,
See,
with James's setup, were you going when on those mating nukes? Were you going to close off the? It looks like you're going. If I'm understanding you correctly, you're going to close off the entrances.
Correct.
Traditionally, and use the holes.
Correct. And what I
Okay,
did
good.
is I've got the different color discs.
Yep.
It'll help the queen find the right.
Yes, I was gonna say that's the only thing I could see as a shortfall in that is if you kept the entrances at the bottom, where you'd see probably a very poor take on your matings because of the queens getting disoriented with the entrances.
Right. So I've used in the past those styrofoam mini mating nukes, and with really really good success. Now I painted each one of those a different color.
Yep.
So this is where with these with a different color disc, I could have 4 different color discs out front, and that should, help the queen find the one, the right home to come back to. So
Doug wants to know, you're going to use the colored disc on your entrance?
absolutely, I got some right here. I'll grab them.
what was Blaine saying about a chainsaw, Charlie?
What's that?
So, Charlie?
What did Blaine say about a chainsaw? Oh, there it is.
Troy, I didn't get to say so. I enjoyed your presentation. I really did.
Yeah.
It's like drinking from a fire hose, but there's a lot there. I
Oh,
appreciate that. It'll be a rewatch for sure.
Yeah.
I don't quite understand what DC's talking about. It says here, just build you a X. That'll work great. I don't know what what that means.
Right.
Yeah, that's what he's going to do. Just build a little cross thing in the bottom.
Exactly. Yeah. And just to make sure that they can't go from one to the other. And the other thing I like about that is it's small. So I can take those off. I can throw them all in a tote, and they don't take up much room. My bee barn is going to be a little bit small this year. So anything I can do to minimize the additional space is also something I'm thinking of, right? And that's just probably a good idea going in the long run too. A little bit less room to store all this stuff. So.
And he wants to know if there's any drain holes in the back of your pallets, Brad.
There are in many of them. I've stopped doing that though. It didn't seem to be that effective. The bees plug them up anyway, so I just don't bother doing that anymore. And yeah, they collect some water, but
Even 5/8 holes so plugged up.
3/4.
Well, you got to be careful of the 5/8 hole. Then the next thing you know, you got a mouse chewing in there, and
Yeah. Well, I had number 8 screen on that,
Okay.
so that's partly how they plugged them all up. But
Well,
I couldn't
yeah,
say any way around that.
Bob Betty mentioned about that in his pallet design that he uses,
Yeah.
where it was drainage holes, and a lot of times the bees would properlize them on shut and stuff like that.
I went with 1/4-inch holes. I put a couple 1/4-inch holes in there, and I've never had a problem with them plugging it up, and that kind of keeps the water out of there.
Yeah.
The only time I have a problem with it plugging up is when I bring the bees out of the barn. Of course, over the winter you get the dead bees down in there. They plug it up a little bit, but this year I made a point of pulling the hives off and scraping those bottom boards off right away. And that made a huge difference with the, just to keep it hygienic in the hive. And the bees really, they bounced off from that really, really well too. So, one extra pallet, we would literally lift it off of one pallet, drop it on the other one, scrape that one, and that pallet would kind of go down the line and down the line and down the line. So the only thing you got to watch there, of course, now I looked at the bees before we did that just to make sure that you didn't have any issues in one hive that now maybe you were transferring to another one.
That's right. Yeah.
So there's Jeff. If you watch my video, I explain the temperatures and everything on there. So it works really, really good. And I keep the temperature a little bit on the high side. But my wax dipper, if you go and you watch the video, I explain how I warm it all up, what temperatures I use, and why I use it there. So I don't want to hijack Charlie's show on that, but I'll keep it on a little bit on the high side. But the good thing with my wax dipper is you'll see there too is it's thermostatically controlled. So it's it kicks on if the temperature drops about 2.5 degrees, and it'll shut off at about 1 degree above, so that gas valve cycles on and off, and I can maintain that temperature on that wax dipper very, very closely. So, but yeah, go take a look at that. I explain it all really, really good in there. And I highly recommend, if anybody is thinking about doing the boxes. I don't have a vendor. I wish I did. If I had a vendor close by like Brad, I would probably use them. But I'm sure glad I got that wax dipper, or built that, because my basically my battery, those 6-frame 3-way pallets that I had, I pressure washed those this spring when I took my battery and put it into my apiary. I pressure washed them, I redipped the boxes, and we were talking earlier on here about new equipment. So that equipment is basically all sanitized, this brand spanking new again. So, and it takes no time to do it. And of course, if you have that equipment, there's not a lot of cost to it. I think, you wouldn't want to have to pressure wash those and take them down. And I think in some cases, commercial dipper might not want to redip those boxes.
No,
But,
well, mine won't dip anything used. It's got to be new.
yeah.
Nothing painted, nothing used.
So
Yep.
when you did that, James, was that a sanitation issue there that you're thinking of?
Yeah. So basically putting the theory to the test, right? Like Troy talked earlier, some of the try it, or get out there. I'm not, I don't have 1,000 hives yet. So, what did I have? I had 60, I can't remember, 60 some 3-way pallets there that, we took the bees out. I had that break in, so I lost 32 hives there. So, my battery basically replenished my whole apiary, so, and that really kind of just, the break-in was a null issue for me, really. And wash those things up. Everybody talked about it on here quite often, how everybody, sees that bees do better in new equipment. So I have the facilities, I have the equipment. Why not clean it up and make it new, and give those nukes every opportunity to to explode again. So.
Hey guys, well, I've been on here for 3 hours plus a half and started the show for Charlie, so I'm probably gonna for this evening.
Yeah, well, thanks, Bob, for covering me there for a while, for a few minutes there.
You made it right at the right time, though. You made it back. So I appreciate it, Troy. It was nice speaking with you this evening to listen to your presentation.
Thank you, Bob.
I'll see you guys on the next stream.
See you, Bob.
Yep. Bob.
Bye.
All right. Let's see. What time is it now? It's almost 11 o'clock here. I'm going to go ahead and shut down the stream, and I want to thank everybody for stopping in on the stream side. Usually we open it up for everybody, but just because of having Troy as a special guest, I wanted to kind of keep it closed and all that. Now, everybody who's on the live right here now, Troy, just stay right where you're at. Don't go away. All right, guys. Until next week, same time, same place, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard, Sawmill Charlie's Bee Farm. We'll get on another chat next weekend.
Good night, everyone.
See you.
Good night, everybody.
Everybody.